So yeah, YouTube was killer for me. I like put it off for a while and then started doing it. And I'm like, all right, I just got to because I really wanted to make sure that my hours for the podcast were not too high every week, right? So like record an episode, I use Riverside, kicks out the transcript, kicks out the files. I don't even really edit episodes. Yeah. Like I'll just literally put it into Premiere, make sure that it all like sounds good. I'll kind of like scrub through it and like look at the sequence to make sure nothing's crazy. And then I'll export an MP3 and then that's it. And so like I tried to keep my like work output low because it's not my job. Yeah. I don't make any money from it. You know what I mean? And then I was like, all right, I heard like you have to use YouTube. Yeah. And I'm like, all right, fine. So then I started uploading the MP4 to YouTube. And then I'm like, all right, I'm not getting any hits. I was like, all right, just keep doing it. And then I put shorts up and then I would like clip some things out and like put those up, you know, using like JRE clips as the reference for like, oh, pull out 5 minutes here, 10 minutes here, like whatever. Yep. And then, I'm up to like, I think like 4,000 impressions a month right now on YouTube, which I mean, considering I have 61 followers and like started it a few months ago, is good. What do you use for the back end for the like podcast platforms for like Apple and Spotify and all that?
So I use Spotify primarily. Yeah. I have to link my RSS feed to Apple yet. So I still have to get onto Apple. Okay. Back in the day, fun fact. Okay. We started the podcast. Carey Kight, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, man.
We're jumping right into I was like, we'll just naturally go into like podcasting, because that's how we met. All right. So what happened was like I had the Nagel Bear podcast back in 2019. Came back from Kuwait. I'm like, all right, I'm going to start one. I had been on my buddies that had one or two, and I'm like, dude, I love doing this. I listen to it. Yeah. It's fun. Kind of a chatty Cathy. So it's like, all right, let's just like have a good time. And so then we get back. Definitely not the best setup. It looked good, but it was like way too much effort per episode. But I did like 11 before COVID. And back then I used SoundCloud. And then SoundCloud linked to, it wasn't even Spotify yet. It was actually Apple. So I just had SoundCloud and Apple. And then YouTube. And then, so I had a little bit of experience with that. But yeah, this time I fired up, I need to link my RSS feed to Apple. Which I need to do because this will be episode 4. Yeah. So I need to do that. Spotify, but then again though, like the culture's changed, like at least in my eyes. I know Apple's still pretty big, but Spotify at that, even 5 years ago, wasn't what it is now. Like it's kind of a beast in the podcast space. So
I use Spotify. Like Spotify is pretty much the only thing I use. I don't use Apple Music, but I mean, still, I think like 75% of the people that listen to my podcast use.
Oh, sorry, that's a heater.
It's a heater. It feels good.
It's freezing in Minnesota. No, that's cool. Like,
well, yeah. I mean, I flew in from Columbus. We were just talking about how there were, multiple single-digit days. Now, we're back up in the high 20s and high 30s.
Exactly. Really nice. It's great. We have it's a warm, got a warm front moving in for 34 degrees today. Yeah. But no, I agree. Yeah, it's the art. So I need to get my Apple Podcasts up and running. But yeah, Spotify has been great, and then the YouTube is where I really focus because it's. I don't know. I think it's building. I don't want to say faster, but I guess my goal is to I'm treating it like a business. You know what I mean? So it's like, so I put a lot of effort into the back end. So like when we're done here, I'll actually I do a slight, but I streamline. I have a pipeline now, so I don't. I only edit for like an hour and a half, maybe a max of 3 hours per episode. Yeah.
Sorry, I just put myself on focus mode here.
Oh, it's all good. And so I do 10 shorts, but I kind of streamline because we'll talk for like 2.5 hours. So I'll be able to pull enough from that, and then I do 3 clips, so just like a good subject, that's it. I don't even like listen to the whole thing. It's like I start where it's good, and then I go 10-12 minutes, and I'm like, sounds like a good ending. Yeah. Unless there's more to it.
Yeah, that's what I do with YouTube stuff. And I'm the same way. Like YouTube has now become kind of the prime. Like it's wild. People watch podcasts. Like I do. I actually used to work for a guy out of the military. Worked at a bunch of restaurants. And I worked for this one guy in Burbank when I was working in LA, and dude, his like the manager office. If you've ever worked at a restaurant, but like behind the kitchen, there's always just like this tiny little closet. It's like where the manager sits. Yeah. And like this dude, he owned the restaurant, so he wasn't floor managing, but he would just be back there watching Joe Rogan. And this was 12 years ago, 10 years ago.
God, yeah.
Yeah, it was like early days. And I listened to Rogan at that time, but I listened. Like I didn't watch. I'm like, oh man, that's weird. That guy like Todd's watching Rogan. Like that's weird. And then now I'll talk to people. I'll be like, oh man, I watched X episode. Like I loved that. I'm like, you watched it? And then I'll go look at the YouTube numbers, and I'm like, holy shit, the YouTube numbers are 3, 4, 5 times a full episode
Yep.
than the Spotify or the Google or Amazon or Apple or whatever. And so it's funny, like when you talk about treating this like a business, like when you're creating a product that you like I got into podcasting because I like podcasts. I like to learn things. I like to hear conversations. I like to hear stories. I do it while I'm driving, do it while I'm doing laundry, doing yard work, like whatever it is. It's like, the old alive time versus dead time kind of thing. And so my bias is towards just listening to podcasts.
Yeah.
And then now I'm like, holy shit, people watch podcasts. So 3 months ago, I started putting effort into the YouTube, like the way that you're describing, which is full episodes, shorts. Those are easy. The same ones I put on Instagram are the ones that I put on YouTube Shorts, no problem. But then I do the same thing you do. It's like, all right, I go through the transcript from Riverside, and I'm like, all right, I want to start at this minute second mark, and then I'll kind of like read through, and I'll be like, okay, that's a good spot to end. I don't know how many minutes that is, and then I'll pull it up on Premiere, and it's like, oh shit, that's 15, 20 minutes. Oh, I want this one to be 3 minutes long. And then like what's wild is you'll put a clip on, and you'll be like, oh man, this clip is great. And I put a really awesome title and like people are going to click on it, or, it's going to get fed to people, and then nothing happens. And then you just put up a random one. You don't put like as much quote unquote effort into the clip or into the title of the video. And then that one gets 10 times kind of what you were expecting. Like I've got a couple, and I'll go through and look at it, on the back end on YouTube and just kind of see like what's performing. I don't want to overdo it because I don't want to like become a, like Moneyball for podcasts, like try to game, I'm going to use this keyword, and I'm going to use this controversial statement in the title. I do that sometimes, right? Like, especially if it's something that I know isn't going to be super controversial, but I want people to look at it, click on it, and then watch it and be like, oh man, that's a really good perspective, either from me or from the guest. But so I'll click on the, up, down arrow on views, and dude, there was one from a few weeks ago that has like 800 views. It's like a 2-minute clip, and that's rookie numbers because we're not Rogan, we're not Sean Ryan, we're not these guys. But I'm like, damn, all right, that's interesting. And then instead of putting too much thought into it, it's just reps. It's just like, all right, just get shit out there. But it's funny, like sometimes I'll be reading through, because that's my process. I'll record an episode, I'll kick out the transcript, I'll read through the transcript, and I'm kind of highlighting what in preview or whatever, like what I want to clip out. And I would say like every other episode, it's shorts only. And then other episodes, I'm like, oh man, we got into a nice little long form, mid form flow right there. Like we'll clip that out as it's like kind of YouTube only thing, and do it in the 16:9. So yeah, it's been fun, man.
Yeah, it's good, and I agree with you too. I think that's I have a pipeline, but I don't stray out of the pipeline too far. So it's like I'm not going to put more than 2 minutes into every thumbnail. You get the head, like I did with Luke the other day. It was like, from admin corpsman to war or something like that, or from no decompression home, war to or it was war to home in 72 hours. Yeah, that actually is doing well, and I kind of knew it would. Yeah. But that's you do those little grabs, but I'm not spending 20 minutes being like, oh my god, I got to come up. It's really like within the pipe, as long as it is in the pipeline for me quickly. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to grab these clips. And it's actually kind of nice now because I don't clip them as hard as I used to, because they've actually loosened up the amount of time. I think it's like, I think Instagram Reels is up to 3 minutes now.
Yeah,
per reel. Yeah. And so because I used to be like, we need to get under 1 minute. And it's like, and you're like cutting every single frame. Yeah. Now it's more of like, cool. And same with YouTube Shorts. I think YouTube Shorts is like 3 minutes or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, and they've changed that. A couple, and obviously Instagram just recently changed their feed, so it's no longer the 1x1 square in the preview, right? And so it's like, you have to,
I started texting people. I'm like, I thought it was a glitch. I was like, oh, this must be stuck on my like Reels, and I kept going. I was like, oh, no fucking way, and I immediately Googled it, and it was like they had tested it somewhere, and then it was like the weekend, or it finally caught up with me.
It was the day.
Yeah,
this weekend. It was the day before the inauguration. Yeah. That it happened, and that was the day that TikTok went offline. I don't use TikTok, but family members were over, we were watching football or whatever, and like they tried to pull up TikTok, and they were like showing me, it was like it was like President Trump was named in the TikTok notification or whatever, and so then I went on Instagram to like do something, and I've got 2 Instagrams, right? One for the podcast and myself, and then another for our production company, and. I don't try to curate a feed necessarily, but I do want if somebody listens to this and they're like, well, let me go check out this dude's Instagram. I want them to go scroll through it and see like, okay, it's at least put together and it's legit. And so like some of them are like cut off, but I'm not going to change too much. Yeah. But yeah, so Instagram changed it to, because I think it was like 3 or 4 months ago, you had to keep IG Reels to under 60 seconds, and then it was under 90 seconds. Because like what I do on Mondays, so like, I record and release every week, or I release every week. I batch record, but so I put the episode live on Sunday night, and then Monday I release the intro to the episode. Like if you listen to it, you'll hear it, or if you watch it on YouTube, you'll see it. And I do a 9:16 version as a kind of like a fun reel, for a nice clip for the guest, plus my intro, so people get an idea of like who I am, new listeners who might come in because of the guest, right? And so those like the intro trailer thing itself is like 54 seconds. So like I knew that I had to keep it to like 34, 35 seconds for the clip, but then it changed it back to 60 seconds. And so then there was one that I watched and it went like, it just cut off at the end, which I mean, most people aren't going to watch that whole reel anyway. They just want to see the clip, who the guest is, and either go listen to the episode or not. And now it's back up to 3 minutes. And that gives like us as creators, it's like, it's so hard to keep up with the trends that are, like, are they dictated by the creators or are they dictated by the platform?
Exactly.
And it's like, it's probably, you and I were talking about this, like we're not influencers who have millions of followers. So it's not like my bread and butter. I don't think about it all the time. Yeah. But you have to think about it a little bit.
Well, that's the thing too, is I think that's the frustrating part. And it was like somebody sent me some memes too. It was like 2024, 25, like it's like you have to be if you're a creator now, you have to be a content creator. Right. And it's like, I'm not a content creator. Right. And I agree with you. Like I loved podcasts. I was the opposite. So I did listen to it on Apple, but I remember like it wasn't a big deal. This is like 2009, 10, 11. And there's like 2 or 3 shows I listened to. I'm like, oh, this is cool. But it wasn't until I went to film school in like 2013-ish, 14 that I was like, oh, I'll just watch YouTube as I work. So and my wife is like you. She's like, people watch podcasts. Right. I was like, YouTube is owned by Google. Google's the #1 search engine. YouTube is the 2nd biggest search engine in the world. Yeah. So you think about it, everyone's eyes are going there. But yeah, because I work. If you're at a desk, you're like, I'll throw on another screen. Yeah. And so it is kind of like this, and maybe it's a psychological thing. Like people, like if you're at your desk working, you don't throw in it depends on where you work. You don't throw in headphones, but you might have something on low volume. People used to watch movies, or like I watch movies obviously because I'm a filmmaker, but so that's where I was like, okay, YouTube I definitely want to invest into. But then over the last year or two, I've been kind of gathering up my my ammunition on like how am I going to execute my podcast. Because I was going to launch last year, but the basement wasn't ready. I was like, okay, let's get to where we got to go. And I committed and bought the equipment. And like I'm doing this, but I also, the thing too, you got to love it. Cause I think there's some brands out there. They're like, well, we need a podcast. I'm like, well, okay, who's hosting? How much do you want to pay? How much do you really care? Like, you got to kind of want to do this, I love doing it. Like I'm excited. Like, oh my God, I'm flying. Like it was one of those weird surreal moments in my life. It's like when you do something, you're like, oh my God, I've been thinking about doing this, and you just do it. Yeah. And it finally happens. Yeah. And like, so it was like, oh sweet. I got buddies coming in. I got Carey coming in. Oh, this is great. And I got more people lining up. Like, so it feels real and you're executing. But at the same point though, I want to make sure that I don't want to say, hey, we're going to make it, I want to make it successful, but I do want to make it so it sustains itself. So, you got to put that effort in to at least get, eventually, and then hopefully in the next few months is like brands come in, but it's not like, oh, I'm living off the high life. Right. It's like, I just wanted to make sure I can fly people in. Yep. And then pretty much it. Like, that's all I wanted to make enough so that this can be self-sustained, Well, and that's the interesting thing, right? Like I started mine during COVID. Like towards the end of that first year of COVID, and I waffled on it, during 2020. I was like, oh, I should do this because I listen to Rogan, and I know that Rogan flies people in, and he talks about the face to face and how valuable it is, and I agree, but I couldn't afford to do that at the time, right? Yeah, exactly. And then there was this little stage in social media and content creation and podcasting where the kind of lo-fi nature of Zoom or Riverside or whatever you use, obviously it helps you because you can just talk to somebody in a different time zone, right? Like Nick Orton, talk to him in Hawaii, and he's been on the podcast twice. We just line that up, no problem. Yep. And then on the creative side of it, like people actually kind of enjoyed the lo-fi nature of it. Then that trend started to end, and now this cinematic thing that you're doing is now kind of coming back on trend. And so you're smart to think like, all right, well, how do I generate enough revenue to be able to fly people in? I'm not at that stage yet because I still want to release an episode like every week. So I want to just batch record these and like get these done and know that I can get people on.
but then maybe try to mix in some of this kind of cinematic approach to it, because I'm a filmmaker too. Like that's the kind of content that I prefer, but maybe not for podcasts. But then again, back to the bias, right? Like, do I do what I'm biased towards, or do I do what allows me to have the output that I want to have?
Exactly. Yeah. And I only do twice a month. And I knew that too. I was like, I can't do every week.
Well, yeah, you're creating a sandbox for yourself, parameters that work.
Yeah. Cause I knew it too. I was like, I got a 7-month-old or 8-month-old and a 3.5-year-old. Like, and I knew that would give me enough leeway, but enough in like my clips, because I focus on YouTube. My clips are what keep that, 3 clips. So it's like, so basically 2 shows creates 8 pieces of content.
Yeah.
That's twice a week. That's enough to feed the algorithm. It's enough to kind of keep that ball rolling.
Yeah.
And I think too, I mean, like I was fortunate enough where it's like, I was building out my, we bought a house with an unfinished basement. So we had built my studio and I kind of was already envisioning, okay, yeah, this will be my studio, my workspace, but like I have this space here, like this will be, I'll make this work, even with guys coming in or doing whatever. But yeah, it was honestly, it really wasn't, it was finished in the basement, but it was like December or November, had a good year. And I'm like, let's fucking do it.
Yeah.
Like, let's do it.
Yeah.
And that's why I just like committed and bought the cameras. Like I was like, I don't care. I just ran the credit cards. Like let's fucking go, and got the first 2 planes out. And it's like, once you commit, then it's, it's like kind of anything else.
Then it becomes a thing that you're committed to, you're invested in, and then you're working at.
And then like I said, I've been editing 9 Lines podcast. In fact, I have another podcast out right now another podcast that might hire me as an editor. So I had enough, I knew enough within the realm to kind of be like, oh, okay, yeah, let's, like, I know enough. I edit enough in that way where my pipeline is set up to where I'm not spending 4 days on a podcast.
Right.
I might bleed into other days, but that's like, honestly, the thing that's the most annoying to me is creating thumbnails for Instagram. Yeah. That's it. Like,
I just use Canva. Like I've got a template and I've got like, I'll kind of alternate some colors, alternate some logos, alternate some things. But there's one thing I look at my YouTube feed and I'm like, because people don't, like think about your habits on YouTube. Like when you go to YouTube, you're not really looking at your own feed, right? You're looking at the videos that get fed to you, or you might click on it and look at the feed. But like I look at it, I'm like, there's a part of me that's like, man, I should spend more time and effort on those thumbnails. But then I remind myself, no, that's not my skill set. Like I'm not a designer. I'm good enough. And that's really not what's going to drive people at my level, at this level, like where we're at right now. For me, people aren't going to,
if you start blowing up and you're making $10,000 a month, like some of the guys that like a buddy of mine, like Eli, unsubscribes, I think at like 800,000. They're crushing it. And they have Dave Reardon, I believe, super talented photographer, great creative kind of like, and they pay him like for thumbnails and he just murders it, and I'm like, at one point before I started, I was like, how much is it going to cost per thumbnail? But I'm like, I can't spend, even if it's $100 a thumbnail, that's money towards
you're like
YouTube promotions.
Two episodes a month, that's 16 pieces of content a month. That's, you scale that times 12, that times 100. And you're like, oh shit. Yeah. Because that's the thing. It's like working toward, like, what are you doing? What do you want the brand to be? How do you want to execute it? And work at what's in front of you and have those goals and put systems in place to get ahead to that next stage. But I think about it the same way. It's like, if I'm making $10,000 a month from the podcast, well, then I'm going to treat it a little bit differently. But I'm currently spending money to make this podcast, right? And so, like, I'm not gonna spend that kind of money right now. But it's good to daydream a little bit about that, to be thinking forward to like, oh, when I can do this, I'll do that. But I mean, we just got approached by a professional athlete who wants to start a podcast, and we might end up producing that person's podcast. And she's the same. She has obviously a huge network of celebrity guests that would want to come on. Yeah. But it'll be a fledgling podcast. And so it's like, all right, well, start with remote, start with Riverside. Yeah. Like I've bulletproofed how this works. Yeah. I can keep the work output low enough to get started and scale. Yeah. And she's famous. I'm not. So it'll scale faster. Yeah. And then we can kind of start doing things that way. But like, if you have like recurring guests, like I've best-selling authors that come on every year, right? That like they have a new book or 2 new books that come out. It's like, well, if I know that I talk to that person's agent and they can just come on the podcast, and I know that all I got to do is get a 30-minute slot with that person. They don't have to fly anywhere. Yeah. And I can, replicate that month over month, like year over year. I'd like to get to a spot where I can start doing this a little bit, but for now,
I saw you got Jack Carr. I was like, dude, that was a big win.
Yeah.
I saw that. I was like, oh shit.
Yeah. He's great. Yeah. He's come on three times, I think. Yeah. And I'm getting him back.
Yeah. I was going to say, he's been on multiple times.
Yeah. And he's coming back on this spring for his new book. And yeah, just
those are fun books. It's funny because he's huge. Obviously, they got the Terminal. I edited that first Terminalist podcast.
Yeah,
so talk about like editing your own podcast, or like, it's just like the military. Pre-planning is prevents piss poor performance, or like mission planning. I worked with the company, and they're great. And I'm not shitting on it, but it was just that one. So what happened was it was Terminalist was coming out. It was actually when we met, or maybe a little bit after.
Yeah.
I got let go from Black Rifle. One of the companies, Ironclad, was like, hey, why don't you come on and we'll work together. I was like, awesome. And I talked with them, and they're a great company. But it got a little shaky with the podcast. They're doing Terminalist podcast, but it was like Jack Carr's setup is phenomenal. So they're like, don't worry, it's only gonna be like 45 minutes an episode. It's gonna be the producer, the writer, so it's like 3 people. Or actually, the original was supposed to be 2.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, cool. And the third one comes on, and then they give me all the files, and it's like, Jack Carr's, they go for like an hour and a half. Well, they're all their mics are drifting.
Yeah.
And none of them are lining up. So I get Jack Carr stuff, which is great. So but his audio file is different. So they're pulling raw audio and then his video. So I have to put the raw video and audio together, get his linked up. And then I got to pull like raw audio, but streamed video to another guest, which is all over the place.
Yep.
So then I got to line that up, and then I had the same thing with the next one, and that was just all over there. And they would like break, and and I'd have to like line up because you can kind of hear one guy and some other guy's ear, and then I had to stack all 3. Dude, and that was before Autopod.
Yeah.
So I had to manually go through a multicam on Adobe and be like, and just hit, dude, and it was mind numbing. And it took me a week per episode.
Yeah.
Per episode. And it was supposed to be like a 1-2 day thing. And, because you want to deliver quality. And then it's like we had like graphic background, and you had to like add stuff. It was like a whole thing. And they were great, phenomenal. Like it was just a funny circumstance because you can be like, hey, right now, like I have it set up. this can be in and out in an hour. Like good editing, everything out. Solid, nothing to worry about.
Yeah.
And then, or so like that happens, they're like, well, we want to do it for you. And it's like, takes me 5 days. And I'm an editor too. It wasn't even like,
because it's back to the way people consume podcasts, right? Like I remember, so I had you on Veteran Made, and then when you invited me on 9 Line, that was like right around the time that I got Jack on the first time. And you and I were talking on the phone, and I was like, something about the Terminalist episode podcast, and you were like, I edited that. I was like, well, I listened to that whole season in prep for my interview with Jack, because I think I DM'd Jack one time, like responded to one of his stories that he had posted about his process of writing, not the novel, but just like writing in general. And I just like DM'd him, and I'm like, hey man, would you come on my podcast and talk about this? He's like, yeah, email this person. So he like gave me their email. I emailed them, and he's like, well, the show is coming out, and then the next book is coming out. Like he'll come on, but it's going to be in like a year or whatever. Right. Which was great. Cause the way that I thought about it was, it's really cool to land Jack Carr.
Yeah.
But it's going to be really cool to have another year of reps under my belt to be better at this, so that the first time I interview him, I'm going to be better than if he would have said, yes, he can do it tomorrow. I'd have been excited, but I've been nervous as hell because I hadn't been doing the podcast for as long. But then you and I were talking, and like I had listened to that. I didn't watch it. So the audio on Spotify is what the audio is on Spotify. I just have it jacked all the way up while I'm working out, or doing laundry or whatever. And so I listened to that whole season, like in prep for that first episode of interviewing Jack, which was, obviously, I love that stuff. Like I'm not a big military thriller guy. Like it's not like my genre of choice, which, might, I guess, surprise some people, like being in the military and hosting a podcast, being a filmmaker, like storyteller. It's actually just not. My uncle recommended his first book. Like I read it and I'm like, oh man, this is cool. Like this is different. I do love old action movies, which turns out that's what informs a lot of what he does. And my grandma and I used to read a lot of the same books and he and I talked about this on the first episode. Like his grandma would take him to the library, and they would get all these books, and they would both read them. And his list of books that he read quite a bit longer than mine, but like my grandma and I would do the same thing. So we kind of had that connection. But like read the book, I'm like, oh man, this is like a little bit different. So when that podcast came out after the show, I'm like, oh, this is cool. Like this is what I need. This is what I'm interested in. Like where does storytelling meet experience, meet new experiences that he was having as he was transitioning into thriller writing, but then into screenwriting and executive producing. And so having his creative partner on there, like it was like perfect fodder for like what I needed. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I happened to use it for prep too. Yeah.
And that's what I did. I that's why I do like Jack Carr above all the other SEALs out there, because I listened to his Rogan podcast and I was like, oh no, this guy is a writer. Like he was a Navy SEAL, but he is a writer. Yeah. Like, and I think maybe because I relate to that, because I wanted to be a filmmaker, director since I was 13. He's been wanting to be a writer since he was a kid. You know, like, so like I love the fact that when he was on, this was years ago too, and you know, it was just like his process, but it was just like he's all in, and he talks about books, and it wasn't just about buds. You know what I mean? Like he obviously pulls from his combat experience, but it's also like, I mean, obviously the book series is all about Navy SEAls, but you write what you know. Like when I write stuff, it's definitely Marines, recon, sniper, or MARSOC. Like it's always, if I'm in that realm or something like that, I include the Marines or something. But he was so honed in on his craft. You know, it was like, wasn't the repetitive stuff that you always get from, you know, SEALs or special operators. It's like, no, he's an author. Motherfucker's an author. Like, and I think that's what kind of really excited me about when he went on Jack Carr. That's why I think, on Rogan, why I kind of like almost respect him a bit more. Because I'm like, this guy is a great writer. And what was funny too is I was going to interview him back in 2021. It was going to be a last minute interview, a last minute handling of his Presence video. It got canceled, but they were like, hey, you're going to interview him in like 3 weeks. Like I was like, okay. So I was going to, I listened to his interviews, and then I listened to the audiobook because I was like, I don't have time to read. Like I got a kid, I got to, so, but what's funny though, is I couldn't take the book too seriously because the guy doing the audiobook would imitate
the voices.
And I was like, you got to switch something up. Cause all I hear is like this guy. And then in my head, I'm starting to laugh in these serious moments because like, all I envision this guy's committing so much that he's dressing up as the female character. So in my head, I'm envisioning this guy in a booth, like committing, this voice actor completely committing. Like he's in a SEAL outfit. He's like, oh, I'm Jack, you know, or whatever. I can't remember the guy's name, but you know,
James Reese.
I'm Reese. And then he's Reese. And then he's got like hair. So like I was laughing through the whole audiobook because I couldn't take it seriously. But it was entertaining. It was entertaining though. Like I listened to it, I was like, oh yeah, this is very entertaining. It read into, to me, it definitely reads like a film. It was obviously a book. But like if you ever read Dan Brown, you know, like the Da Vinci Code.
Yeah, of course.
Dude, that's like blockbuster crack. So if you're a filmmaker and you read Dan Brown, the way he structures chapters is exactly how a film's made.
Correct.
Like, or even because like one chapter will be a paragraph. So it's a cut scene. That's all it is. It's just a cut scene. And then it's like, oh, the guy, you know, goes to the alley, cut back, and then you're across the world. So it's set up like a film. And like the way he amplifies, even from like, this was back in like 2006, I read. So Da Vinci Code was already out, and he's already got his third, fourth book. So that was, I can't remember which one it was. It was like one of his first ones, but the way like
Angels and Demons, or
well, way before that. It was before Angels and Demons. It was like 2 before that. I read it in my first deployment. And it was 06, so it probably came out in like 2000 or something. But it was like, it amplifies like a Michael Bay movie. Like swear to God, like the last like few pages is like, oh my God, and then this happened, and then the timer's going out. Like it's a ticking clock. And so I remember reading them and being like, this is a movie. Like the guy is writing a film, essentially. So anyways, I was a big fan of Jack Carr when I heard him, and I was like, he's definitely one I'd love to get on. But
the thing that's cool about him is like, you know, we all make fun of Navy SEALs because they all write books, right? Like that's the joke, right? You graduate buds and you get a book deal. I think the difference with him is that like he doesn't write about himself. He lets his experience inform what he writes, but he's not writing a nonfiction book, you know, celebrating his own efforts and his own contributions, right? He is actually crafting a story, informing what he did and where he did those things into the story, but the story is king. And he wants to make sure that, you know, and what's cool about him is it's like world building. The thing that, because I was saying I don't like military thrillers so much is because they're all kind of the same, right? Like each book in a series with a character is that character. It's like Jason Bourne in a, you know, same guy in a different place with a different task, but it's like all pretty much the same thing. Whereas what Jack has done with the Terminal List is he's like built a world. I mean, his next book is going to be Cry Havoc is what it's called. It's going to be that's going to be a prequel about Reese's dad, right? Who's been referenced in the novels, but each book is different. Like the journey, it's like aging, and it's like John Wick, right? It's like, you know, John Wick takes place over the course of like, you know, a couple of months or whatever, but like the guy ages in real time. The injuries he had previously like are still in effect, and kind of like doing that stuff. So I think that's what makes him a little bit different on the like creative side. And then on the veteran side of things, what I think is really cool about him is that he just lets his experience inform him, but he doesn't like identify it with it. Which is I think something that we all tend to do, and it's like really easy to do. So like, I identify as a veteran, especially now, like identity is like this big thing in our society and culture. It's like, well, I identify as a veteran. So like everything has to be this, and this, and I have to wear these clothes and talk this way and talk about these things, or tell these kinds of stories. Whereas Jack is just like, I'm gonna let that inform, my work, but it's not all of who I am, and so I'm just going to go tell these stories the best way that I know how. Which, it's cool.
Like I said, I think that's really cool. Come from that community, you're like totally. Awesome, like
very unique.
Very unique. And even like I said, I hate to say it, I only watched the first like 5 minutes of Terminal List because after I edited the whole thing, I was like, I'm not, I'm done. It was really, and actually, I knew the ending before the show even came out. Right. I knew the ending from the book itself. But things change. But I had listened because I was editing it. So at that point, I was like, I was a little frustrated with the whole project because it was like literally a week per episode. So it was like mind numbing, and it was like my computer was crashing, and it was constant back and forth, and it was Anyway, so that by the end of it, I was like, I watched it. I watched for 5 minutes. I'm like, I'm out. Like I've had too much of this. Yeah. But no, it was awesome. But I think that's what's cool. Like I said, with his experience, like you said, I agree with you on that. It's like he's drawing from his experiences, but he's writing nonfiction, fiction, and is like creating stuff and moving forward, almost like you're moving forward. And hearing his story, it's like it's really cool because that, like I said, we're 15 years on now, so that I think that shine has worn off a bit from the GWOT, and even though it's 3 years technically since the war ended, it's really the height was 10, 12 years ago, or that's when it starts to wane.
Well, and he does a good job too of integrating history, not just from the GWOT, but from other conflicts, and how foreign policy has been affected over time, since World War II and through Vietnam and Korea and all these different conflicts, first Gulf War and all of that. So it makes it unique and it's fun, and it's super cool to have a guy like that in the community who. Yeah, we'll just go on some dude's podcast in Columbus, Ohio, who doesn't get nearly as many listeners as Joe Rogan, but he's like, I'll come on, I'll talk to you for 30 minutes and talk about the craft.
Yeah, it'll be a year from now, but we'll get on.
Yeah. Well, now I've gotten ahead of it.
I know. I think that's the challenge for me because like I want to do that. Like, going back to a little bit of podcast was like I want to do the video ones, but then it's like, all right, if I'm committing, like I'll fly out to you, or something like I'm kind of in that, if like say Jack Carlands or somebody big, it's like, or that can't maneuver their way to Minneapolis, Minnesota. Like,
you have a different skill set even than I do, right? Because like I'm not a tech guy. Like I'm serviceable as an editor for certain things, but like I don't shoot, I don't light, I write, direct a little bit, but mostly at this stage I'm producing. So it's more of like storytelling from the conceptual angle and like working with DPs and working with shooters and editors and all those people. So I think what you're talking about is really smart. I think Zach Bell was telling me about that as well. Like he's like, I've got a mobile setup. So like, I'm just going to go and interview people there. So it's not like you have to come to Franklin, it's like he can pack up and go. You have that skill set. He has that skill set. It's not one that I have. And again, back to what we were talking about earlier, is that a skill set that I want to invest in developing right now, or keep going the way that I'm going? And then, have people I have relationships with in the network who can do that kind of thing where it's like, hey man, I got a line on something. Get your mobile setup together. We're going to bumfuck wherever.
It's worth doing. Because like right now I want to get Jeff Reed. He's a great dude. It's SEAL. Funny. But they're moving, but in that same aspect, like I was like, all right, I'll fly to Alaska. Like I'll take my setup. He's got 3 kids. Either trying to sell their house, I'm trying to, I'd like to get that, before they'll eventually move back. They're moving back to 48, but I was like, it'd be nice to like go up and see it, and then honestly go to Alaska one more time.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, absolutely.
It's gorgeous.
Beautiful
up there.
place.
I know. Yeah. So, but being able to like maneuver and do that. But so like I said, some of these cases, it's nice to be able to like, okay, I'll come to you, or I'll, make that work if that works better, like I said, we were talking with Warfighter Tobacco, like you have a setup, I'll just fly to you and then we can smoke cigars. I mean, that's the primo. It gets me into Texas and smoke cigars. Like that's
one thing. Like like I said, I listen to podcasts, but I'll see clips or whatever. And if I hear something like on Rogan or whatever, I'm like, oh, let me go find that clip on YouTube because I know somebody clipped that part out. And you watch those guys, like they're having bourbon, they're smoking cigars. I'm like, oh man, that's the move. If I could smoke cigars while I podcasted, that's the dream.
I told him, man, I was like, so it was an unfinished basement, and I looked into like
getting one of those
and I was like, well, what can I do to like run it, to ventilate? And it was too much. It was going to be too expensive. And then, because it's got to go out through the house, and then it would be sucking through. And then Amanda's already like, she's like, no way. She doesn't sound like that. But, she's like, no, we're not doing that. My house is going to smell like smoke. I was like, but I can like plastic it out. We can do a whole thing.
Don't worry, honey. I've got it.
And she's like, absolutely. So it did. Yeah. But then at one point we finished, and I was like, oh, there's these air purifiers. Yeah. How awesome would that be? That I could like put it next to because as long as you like put it like right next to you, it'll like suck in. I was like, well, maybe I could like stick a thing here right off camera, and then and it would just suck right in. And I talked to John, and I was like, could you do that? And he's like, well, in his house, obviously he owns a cigar company, so he's like, yeah, I have a vent in my house, and then I use one of these air purifiers. They're like $1,000, but I was like, I'll spend it. Like that'd be awesome, and not just for guests, but just like. I was like, I'd love to rip like a cigar while I'm editing. Like one of my vices, that'd be sick. Like twice a week, just because
nicotine. I mean, I've got a nicotine pouch in right now, and like nicotine is good for good for the brain. It's good for the
And it's just like, I miss it. 'Cause we used to smoke all the time with my dad. And that was like our bonding time. And I used to smoke cigars a lot, and it's just like, you get a family. My buddies have families. We're all young kids, so it's just like trying to get together. Amanda's not a fan of it, and then it's like, all right, then there's only so many times out of the year, and then it's like, I don't like smoking alone, and and I'm like, but that would be sweet though, to like, if I could be like on a long edit and just fire up a stove and just like smoke a cigar.
It's probably a business idea
there
right there to like
design
a small, super industrial air purifier that you can just
Any of my 1,800 subscribers, please get on that.
Exactly.
Well, shit, we're already 36 minutes in.
Let's go.
Where'd you start off? Like, we started off with all that, but I mean, how'd you get into the filmmaking? I know you said Airforce, and then, I mean, you're in it. You're producing. I mean, you're doing some awesome stuff.
Yeah, thanks, man. Yeah. I mean, getting into filmmaking was a lifelong dream. I wanted to be an actor when I was a kid.
Oh no shit!
Loved movies. I've loved movies since I was a kid. Favorite movie of all time.
Yeah. Well, you were born in 88, right?
I was born in 88.
Okay, so maybe we're in the same. I was 87, so we're in the same like realm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I hate the question of like favorite movie of all time. But
influential, I should say. I'm the same way. I don't have. I have influential films.
I mean, I'll just list off a bunch, right? Because like there's a handful of genres that I really like. So I love sci-fi. I love like the old school action films, right? But like for me, it's sci-fi. It's Alien. It's Aliens. It's Predator. Grew up on the Star Wars films. Like love the Star Wars films. My dad watched the Star Trek TV shows. Like so, I would catch a little bit of Star Trek here and there. Ended up like really liking the ones that J.J. Abrams did. Like I thought he did a good job.
I don't know why people shit on him.
Yeah,
I think they're.
I don't understand. Yeah.
Those
were super fun. So like I love that. And then I grew up like reading a lot of like sci-fi fantasy, like high fantasy. So Harry Potter, yes. Like I think we're like the same age as Harry. So like I don't know if you read those books, but
later on in life I read.
Yeah. So I started them in like 5th grade.
Yeah.
So when he was like 11 or whatever it was, I was 11, and so then I caught up. And then each year that they would come out, I would be the same age as him.
Yeah.
So like I love those books. The movies are good. Like I do really like the movies, but I love the books. Yeah. And then like I really got into indie film like pretty early, like when I was a kid. Not a kid, like when I was like in high school. So I love like Away We Go, Sam Mendes's movie with John Krasinski and Maya Rudolph.
That's
where
a
they're
deep
like,
cut.
Yeah, where they're like, she's pregnant and they're like traveling around the country to figure out where they want to like raise their kids.
I'm aware of that one.
Yeah, it's like really good. It's like in that Little Miss Sunshine genre, Little Miss Sunshine, Away We Go. Yep. Krasinski made another one like that called The Hollers.
Yeah, I've heard of that. I haven't seen it, but I know
that was really. So I love like those kinds of movies. The Way Back. I love those kinds of movies. And then like old school classics like The Princess Bride. We just showed my daughter The Princess Bride for the first time the other day. She loved it until she got to the rodents of unusual size, and then she got kind of scared. She's funny like that. She's going to be 5 here in a couple of weeks, and like there's some things that she'll get scared of, and then other things that she won't, and it's kind of surprising. So she was loving Princess Bride, then got to Rodents of Unusual Size, and like she didn't like that. But I've shown her Justice League, Batman versus Superman, Wonder Woman, like those movies. She's like has no problem with that kind of sci-fi violence, but something about those puppets, I guess, that kind of threw her off. But and then I grew up watching like great comedies. Right, like love like What About Bob. I showed my daughter and I had like a rainy day a few weeks ago. We watched both Father of the Bride movies back to back with Steve Martin. Yeah. Love those movies. I grew up on Jim Carrey, Liar Liar, Ace Ventura, Dumb and Dumber, like all of that stuff. I mean, it's a wide range of like influences and interests for me as a filmmaker. Love Christopher Nolan. I like J.J. Abrams. Like I appreciate, he gets shit on a lot because it's hard. Like third acts are hard. It doesn't matter who you are. And he has a problem with third acts, but like I still like I like everything.
This style's phenomenal. Yeah. To me, he's the perfect watered down version of Michael Bay. Yeah. He is. He's like a restrained. Yeah. And it's like a perfect match. Yeah. I mean, like you watch Star Trek. It's just a little bit more. It becomes a wild Michael Bay adventure. Yeah. But he's like just scaled enough back, but it's phenomenal. Yeah,
like, I mean, I love Michael Bay too. I mean, I love all the Bad Boys movies. The Transformers movies are fun. Loved Pain and Gain. Who was it? You just said Michael Bay. Made me think of something else. I can't remember.
Armageddon, The Rock.
Armageddon. So yeah, I mean, The Rock, Con Air, like those kinds of movies are like some of my favorites of all time. Like so rewatchable. But Armageddon is probably in my top 5 of all time. It's a weirdly beautiful movie.
It's phenomenal. It's amazing.
For men, I think especially, right? Like it's a bunch of guys who are misfits, who really don't have purpose anymore. They're like really good at a job that's thankless that people, don't even realize that we need anymore, right? Oil and all that stuff. And then they get to execute the dream of going to space and being an astronaut and, drilling a hole into a giant meteor and blowing it up, right? Yeah. Like that's like the most like little boy dream of all time. But like as you're watching the movie, you see these men develop relationships with each other, further develop relationships with each other, start to understand each other a little bit more. What's his name gets reconnected with his ex-wife, assistant coach from Remember the Titans. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but like it's like the line of. Where she calls her son in and she was like, "Hey, that man's on. Hey, the salesman's on TV. That man's not a salesman. That's your dad. Like, dude, that wrecks me. I mean, I could start watching that movie on TNT 3 minutes before that scene and then get to that scene and I'm a blubbering mess. Yep.
It's flawless. That's like my number 1, 2. Yeah, it's literally like that. To me, is a perfect film. And it's like there's everyone's like it's flawless. Like it's like the music.
Don't talk to me about plot holes. I don't give a shit.
Yeah, exactly. I don't give a fuck about.
We're talking about oil drillers blowing up a meteor in space. Get fucked.
And it's amazing. A beautiful movie. Like and it's like at the end too, and you're like, especially when you start having kids, or if you get older and you understand like sacrifice or like I have to go and I might not come back. Like it's way different.
Do you remember that?
Way different.
I mean, spoiler alert: the movie came out in 1997. So, so the end of the movie when Liv Tyler's character is talking to Bruce Willis. Yeah, his character is her dad, right? And she's like on the screen, and he like sent Ben Affleck back, and he's going to sacrifice himself there, right? At the end of the movie. The William Fichtner's character is like, salutes her and he's like, ma'am, permission to shake the hand of the daughter of the bravest man I've ever known. It's like, again, waterworks. But then do you remember the Aerosmith music video? Yeah. For that? And they put Steven Tyler and the band on those screens and she obviously has her dad in real life and she's like doing the dad. It's like, the movie is just you're right. It's flawless. It's perfect. It's beautiful. It's incredible. I'm probably gonna rewatch it tonight when I get home.
It's Criterion Collection. It's under if you dive in as a DP, I got real deep in the cinematographers when I went to film school. So it's like almost going back and understanding why I like the films the way I like them. Yeah. And so, anyways, I think it was Andrew Schwartzman or Jason, one of the two. They're actually related, Jason Schwartzman and then Andrew, whatever. They're like stepbrothers. But he's the DP. But you watch that film and it's like it's crazy. I mean, it's like gorgeous. It's beautiful. Every shot is like a masterpiece. Like even in NASA, they talk about it's like NASA does not look like that, and they're like, we got to make this look amazing. And it's like who has especially back in 98 or 96 or whatever 98, who has 50 TV screens to do like a video call?
Yeah, but it's
phenomenal.
Yeah.
You know, and like it's amazing.
And the cast is stacked. You got Billy Bob in that movie. Yeah, it's incredible. Yeah. Another movie I love from back in that time is a little bit later than that was A Knight's Tale with Heath Ledger.
Yeah, good, very good. Yeah,
phenomenal movie. Like anachronistic music, like that old school rock and roll, like AC/DC. Soundtrack to a movie that takes place in like Renaissance times, which was like super cool. Again, stacked cast. Like it's a very underrated movie. I think that he was in.
Oh yeah.
Waiting for that one to come out on 4K. It's still just on Blu-ray, but I hope they up-res that to 4K.
Here's the thing though, you gotta start buying them.
I know.
I have a list, and it was 20 because of Cillian Murphy with Oppenheimer.
Yeah.
People started trying to buy 28 Days Later, and it's out of print.
Yeah.
And you can only find it. You got to pay like $60 for it.
Used on Amazon or whatever.
I think I have it. I have 28 Weeks Later because 28 Weeks Later I love.
Yeah.
28 Days Later was great. I think it's floating around here. If not, like it's on my list.
Yeah.
And it kind of freaked me out a little bit because there was a point in film school where streaming took over and DVD and Blu-rays were cheap.
Yeah.
They were like $3 on Amazon. And I would go on, buy 10 movies for like $50. And it was the full special feature, limited, ultimate editions.
Yeah.
And now things are coming out of print. And it's kind of people are talking about like books, but now it's film. And so I have a list, and every time people ask me like, what do you want for your birthday? What do you want? I was like, here's a list.
Yeah.
And I just buy it. I won't even open, like the package is still on. I was like, I just want them. They're great movies. I need them in my collection.
I made that mistake earlier. I'm a big Half Price bookstore guy. Do you know the chain Half Price books? They have them all, not all over the country, but it's kind of like, different cities across the country. My grandma and I used to go to Half Price books all the time together when I was a kid. And then there was a 50-cent movie theater right next door. Oh. So we would like go to Half Price books, buy, sell, like do whatever, and then like go see a 50-cent movie. And it's usually a movie that had run, the month before, like 2 months before, whatever.
Dollar theaters, that's what we called them.
Yeah. So what I would do is like I would trade in my old like DVDs or Blu-rays, and like I look back and I'm like, dude, I should have just hung on to all of them, because like even when I enlisted. Like when I saved all the boxes, but you remember those old CD cases?
Yeah, I lost a few that way too. Yeah,
and I had this giant fucking book that like most people would use them for CDs to listen on their Walkman or whatever. Yeah, but those were like DVDs, and I had them, and I just took that all over the world with me when I was enlisted, and my wife is going to listen to this and give me shit later, because like she's like, I used to do Redbox, dude. I used to go to Redbox outside of a Walgreens or whatever.
We did too.
CVS and like rent a Blu-ray, because like I like that. And we have a great TV and we have a great setup now. So like these digital ones that you get are pretty good. Like I remember when everybody hated the Game of Thrones finale or the like second to last episode or whatever. We watched it on our TV and we're like, what are you talking about? The blacks are crisp, like the shadows are great, like everything's incredible.
Yeah.
Because like we've invested in a really good, not even invested like it's crazy expensive. She's a nerd for that kind of stuff. And so we found the right setup. And so she's like, we don't need DVDs or Blu-rays. And I'm like, I mean, you might not need them, but I feel like I need them. You know what I mean?
Yeah. If you saw my setup here, like now I'm holding off. We're going to get an 85 inch. So this is going to be the theater room, quote unquote. And they make 100 inches now, but I think it might be a little too big. But it's an 85, so that's a 60 in there right now. And for anyone listening, it won't matter. But you went through my basement, but but that's, and you saw my DVD collection, and that's what like my childhood, like, but for me it is like, I miss sitting down and like working and then like having like putting the disc in, and I would like my wife, even when we met, I would just throw a Blu-ray in, and it would just, in our old house in Maplewood, and it would be like Die Hard. Yeah. And she's like, what are you doing? I was like, what? And I'd be working. She's like, why is the TV on? And I'm like, if I need it's my life. Yeah. Like I just need something of the origin of film playing here. Yeah. Like
I love that.
I love, and if a scene comes on, I'm like, oh yeah, because it's just part of you.
Yeah.
And that's what I want here is like. And I told as soon as the kids get old enough, I was like, as soon as Finley hits 8, I think girls are different. I was watching Terminator 2 at like 3, 4 years old.
Yep.
I don't think she can handle that, but it's like, as soon as she becomes, 5, 6, 7, 8, like I have a whole collection that we're going to just sit down. It's not even streaming. Like I'm like, we're going to sit down, we're going to watch the Blu-rays and or, DVDs.
Andrea saw something cool on Instagram the other day. Cause like, our daughter's, Isla's almost 5. She'll be 5 in 2 weeks. Right. And like, she knows how to work the Apple TV, and she's good. We don't let her watch YouTube. Yeah. So like she'll ask to watch YouTube. We'll say no. And then she'll find something, we'll be upstairs doing something, watching our own thing or watching football or whatever. And she'll be like, Dad. Like, she's like, come here. So I go downstairs to the basement. Yeah. She's like, hey, can I watch this? And I was like, and I'll say yes or no, right? Like based on whatever it is. But we were talking about it the other night, like over dinner, and we were like, it's probably not great that a 5-year-old can just know how to use the Apple TV, right? She's a good kid for now. She's not watching anything she's not supposed to be watching. So she saw this cool thing on Instagram. Like, those TV carts that we used to have in elementary school?
Oh, yeah.
That like had the big box TV and had the VCR at the bottom. So this person on Instagram posted like their kids have one of those in the basement with a stack of the old Disney VHSs that we had, the white case and like all that stuff.
Got them right in here.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so like, we're thinking about doing that, like getting one of those and being like, hey, you want to watch Beauty and the Beast? You want to watch Robin Hood? You want to watch these movies? Like put it in, be kind, rewind, and like watch it. That's kind of how we watched it. And it's like, I think, this might sound silly to some people, but I think like what you and I are talking about is like, this is how vintage happens, right? Like this is how you appreciate craft. This is how you appreciate physical things. Like we're evolving into an ever more digital world, which there's a ton of value in, like these AI tools that we use to edit these podcasts, cut our output down enough that we can spend more time with our kids. Well, that's a wonderful trade-off. Like I'm going to take that. But then if it starts to run our lives and we just become digitized people and we don't have an appreciation for physical things, well, then we're going to lose part of like what makes you and I who we are because of when we grew up. And our kids are coming up in a time where you and I lived through and grew up through
everything,
a really, really fast transition. Yeah. But our kids are going to grow up and that transition is going to be faster, but we're not going to notice it as much because the change is going to be incremental, but like in the, kind of past that point of no return. Yeah. So you're talking about like Blu-rays and DVDs. Like, so I moved from DVDs to Blu-rays, but now looking back, like there's some DVDs that I want to get. Like I love the The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings books.
Got them. Yep.
Do you remember the DVDs that came out, the extended versions?
Got them.
There's a red one, a blue one, and a green one, the leather, right?
Yep.
Like I think Fellowship is green. You've got them.
Yep.
Like I don't have those anymore.
Yep.
So like so I've got on my Amazon card, I've got like the 4K, collection. It's like $50 or whatever, 4K Blu-ray and the extended versions, and like it's cool. But like I want to go find those leather bound box set of that. I think I saw one you have Star Wars too. It's like I wish I had the old. Remember when Star Wars? Remember right before the prequels came out when we were kids? Yeah, they released the VHS like restored versions.
Yep. THX sound.
Yeah, dude. And it's like those. It's like so. But again, like it might sound silly, but this appreciation for physical things and the appreciation for the craft, especially for us as filmmakers, like we grew up on this and now we do this for a living, so we're going to share it with our kids. Like, hey, this isn't just like a thing that we do. This is our life, like it's part of our life. Like this is, we were talking about identity earlier. It's like, like filmmaking is an important piece of, even if my kids don't grow up to be filmmakers, it's still going to be an important part of their life because their parents are filmmakers. Yep. And so the way that we watch and the way that we talk about things is just different. And I think appreciation for physical things and appreciation for what came before you. Like we love records. Like my wife is a musician, was a musician. I'm not a musician, but because I have this mindset about film, like we have records and we're like growing a record collection and we got a really nice record player and like we look at vintage things in a slightly different light, I think, than people who are just kind of going with the flow. No judgment, right? Like people, you live your own life and do your own thing.
They don't live in that. They never lived in that era. Like I can't blame my wife is only 4 years. She's 4 years younger. So she was still part of that era, DVDs, you go to the movies. With our kids though, or even say my niece and nephew, they were that last transition of DVDs to streaming. And even then, I'm pretty sure they're more streaming.
But unless we go buy a shitload of the old school VHS white Disney cased books that they not the books, but like I should have saved those, right? Like my parents should have saved those because like my daughter might not ever know what those are unless she sees a picture of them, right? Did you watch the documentary, The Last Blockbuster?
No. Oh yes, I did. Yeah, I did.
Super cool. It's not like crazy cinematic or anything. It's like a great story.
It's a fun little,
But like we're gonna have to tell Isla what it was like to go to Blockbuster. Yeah. I mean, shit. My sister-in-law's 21 years old. Yeah. She doesn't really remember what it was like to go to a Blockbuster. Yeah. She was. I've known my wife since we were 13 years old. So like. Her sisters were there with us when we were like going to Blockbuster and hanging out at the house, but they don't remember it. Exactly. Now they're just like kind of fully in this like digitized generation. So those things are like really important. So I grew up loving films. I grew up watching films. I grew up wanting to be an actor. And then when I got to high school, I discovered on these DVDs, I discovered the behind the scenes documentaries, the making of, right, where you're listening to Michael Bay talk, you're listening to Spielberg talk. I didn't mention Indiana Jones, like I've got a Last Crusade poster in my study back home. Like Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade is not just my favorite Indiana Jones movie. It is in my top 5 favorite movies of all time. Like my best friend and I growing up, I mean, we watched that VHS and rewound it. We watched it hundreds and hundreds of times. Like that movie, you know, some of these others like Point Break and The Rock and Con Air and all these, like we could literally recite these movies as they happen, right? Because of how many times we watched them. So I didn't know that I loved the craft of filmmaking, but I did. I came into it through wanting to be an actor. I played sports, so I took theater class and I was in theater club, but I couldn't ever participate in the plays and the productions because I was playing sports. And you know, I liked having that kind of well-rounded approach, and I feel good about it. I don't like regret, not being, you know, in the productions. But so I did a little bit of both, and then discovering those behind-the-scenes documentaries and the making of, and listening to all these people talk about the way they made these movies, was like, oh, wait, there's a screenplay? Like, what's a screenplay? You know, and so then I would go to Half Price Books with my grandma, and I would go to the movie section. I would find a screenplay, and I would like, you know, now you can just print the PDFs from the Blacklist or whatever, which is awesome. Again, another way that technology is great, because now I have a Google Drive of like all of the Blacklist screenplays, you know, from the last 20 years, and I'm able to like read them on my iPad, which is great. So I discovered screenplays, and then these, you know, behind the scenes making of it. I'm like, oh, maybe I want to write and maybe I want to direct. And so when I was in high school, really good English student, really good history student, really smart in math and science, but I didn't try that hard. So I started writing and like really, really wanted to get into filmmaking on that side, wanted to go to college for creative writing. My grades, like I said, were not great. And so I ended up enlisting just to get some kind of like interdependence from my family and some financial independence, knowing I was going to use the GI Bill, get out, get a few years of experience, and then come back and go to school, you know, on the GI Bill, knowing that I didn't have to convince my dad to pay for art school for a kid who like didn't have the best grades. You know what I mean?
Back then it was Montgomery still, right, when you joined. Because
when
I
joined,
like 06,
it was,
right?
I mean, listen, I'm a poster child for like joining under circumstances that I didn't fully understand, right? Like, you know, I enlisted for 3 reasons, like kind of a trifecta. A little bit of patriotism. 9/11 happened when I was in 8th grade. So kind of like, watched it all unfold on the news, watched World Trade Center, Oliver Stone's movie when it came out towards the end of high school. That definitely had an impact on me to want to go serve. Like I said, I wanted to get some like interdependence from my family. I had a great relationship with them, my dad and my stepmom, and my older brother, but like they pushed me really hard to be like, dude, you're not ready for college. Like, like if you go to college and we pay for art school and you flunk out, like that's a big deal to like, you know, that's not a good thing. Right. And then that third piece was just to like go on an adventure and go try difficult things and just get out. Right. And just like go try new things. And so I didn't fully understand how the GI Bill worked. I didn't fully understand how benefits worked. I was like, let me just enlist. I was deployed to Bagram when they passed the post 9/11 GI Bill.
Oh, no shit.
Yeah. And so I remember like guys in the unit, like we were in the break room talking about it. And I'm like, what are you guys talking about? And they're like, oh, older guys, right? Like, you know, E7s and E8s are like, this is a big deal, dude. Yeah. Like this means you can get out probably sooner than you thought you were going to get out if this is, you know, you want to go pursue this. And so I did a little bit of research into it. I'm like, oh, wow, post 9/11 GI Bill is killer. Yeah. And so that helped me decide to, you know, get out and go back to school. And so I got out. I went back to Ohio State. I grew up in Columbus and went to high school there. Wanted to be close to family again, right? Like I was very close with them, and I'd gone off and had these adventures. You know, deployed a couple of times, went on a bunch of awesome TDYs. Like really got a strong foundation for a life and a perspective. And I didn't write scenes, and I didn't write journals, and I didn't write like, you know, like excerpts of novels or anything when I was enlisted, but I had a journal, and on my, you know, iPhone, like I would take notes on like scenes and like different things I wanted to explore as a writer. I had this really like, my approach was I want to go learn the craft. Like I know that I want to do this thing. I've watched like Jack, right? Yeah. Like I've watched all of these movies. I've read all of these novels, but I don't know how to do this thing. So I need to go learn how to do it. And I want to be close to my family. So I went back to Columbus, attended bar for a year, got into Ohio State, into the film studies program, which I really enjoyed my time at Ohio State my freshman year. But the program was not specific enough. It was not practical.
It's like a general, like, because sometimes do like cinema studies,
like film crit, lit crit, right? Like you learn how to be the next, Roger Ebert or Joel Siskel or whatever. And which again, like I read film criticism throughout all this time too. Like I had a deep appreciation for what like film critics. I thought I had a deep appreciation for what film critics did. Yeah. Now as a maker, like they can get fucked. But like, I had this kind of whole, like, I was like, the only missing piece here is the how, like the what and the how, right? Like, how do I go learn how to do this thing? Yeah. So the film studies program was cool. I actually had some great professors. I learned a lot, but I got to the end of my senior year and I was taking my freshman year of college. I failed Comm 101. It was like a 500 person lecture hall course. Mm-hmm. I studied, it was Communications 101, taught by TAs, right? I studied like each module. I studied and it started with cavemen, all the way up until modern. I studied the what of, they just wanted names and dates on these tests. So I turned these tests in and like, it was, who did this? And I'm like, no, that doesn't interest me. What interests me is like the stuff that they did, not when they did it. So I failed that class and then I got, I joke about this. I earned a D- in a comparative literature class. It was like a 300 level class, and the professor was this awesome woman. She still works at Ohio State. I think she's from West Virginia or Pennsylvania. She worked her way through college in the factories. Yeah. Like she was just this like short, stocky, just like bull of a woman who was just like super smart and super intellectual, but she had this very grounded, practical blue collar background. Mm-hmm. She pulled me aside, towards the end of the class, and she's like, "Dude, you're in danger of failing this class." She's like, "What are you doing here? How did the veteran department like let you take this class? There's 2 classes you were supposed to take before. It's a 300 level class." She's like, "You're a strong writer, you're smart." But she's like, "But you're not prepared. Like, what are you doing?" And I kind of like broke down a little bit, not like in tears or anything, but I was like, I broke it down with her, and I'm like, I think I need to leave this school because like I don't think I'm being well prepared for what I want to do, which is go make films. She's like, I think you're right. Yeah. So she actually helped me. I looked at a bunch of, so I went online and I Googled top screenwriting colleges, universities in America. University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, Florida State in Tallahassee, University of Miami in Miami. And then there was this one called Full Sail University in Orlando, Florida. And it was kind of like Phoenix or DeVry, but for the arts. Yep. So they had film, they had music, they had all this different stuff. That one interested me because it was a bachelor's degree. So I would get a BFA. So it'd be a full degree, like a real one, in case I ever needed a real job. Mm-hmm. But it was accelerated. Yeah. So I was using the post 9/11 GI Bill. It was yellow ribbon. So they accepted everything. I was working waiting tables and tending bar. I had a car. I got an apartment, paid my rent, had some extra money. GI Bill really helped me there, and I just plowed through that program. And that was the creative writing for entertainment program. So it was mainly screenwriting, but we worked across all media, video games, short stories, screenplays, and then we studied all the genres. We had a horror course, we had a thriller course, we had a fantasy course, a sci-fi course, drama, comedy, and then a bunch of other kind of like well-rounded liberal arts type stuff that would just inform being a writer in new media, this kind of emerging media. The one thing they didn't have was like copywriting for advertising, so I had no exposure to advertising in film school at all. One of my professors did some copywriting, but I didn't really ask any follow-up questions. I was like, I'm just going to go to LA and try to make it as an indie filmmaker. And what ended up happening was, I graduated, did really well.
How long did that take then? You did accelerated. So, because I know a Full Sail, 2 years. Okay, so Full Sail's 2 years.
4 years and 2 years.
Okay.
Yeah, 2 years. Yeah, it was like 2 years and 2 months or something.
Okay, yeah. Because I know, I remember Full Sail when I was in high school. I took a look at USC, but at Full Sail came, this was like 2003, 4. And I remember being like, oh man, this is where I want to go. But I remember it was more expensive, I think, at the time than USC was. Yeah. This was, like I said, 2003. And so I went to USC to go check it out one summer for we did a family vacation. We checked out the school. Did a walkthrough and everything.
At Full Sail?
At USC. USC. And I was like, no way. Like, no. It was like the summer before senior year, kind of already committed to Marine Corps. Like, I was like, I'm just going to join. Yeah. But it was, they didn't like convince it. It wasn't convincing. It was terrible. I would say it's like, I was actually very disappointed in that school, but what you later find out is it's not so much what you learn there, it's the network that you develop there, essentially. Because like when I went to film school, like our film projects looked way better than USC guys. Like it was, like they just did. And I talked to my professor, he's like, yeah, he's like, but you don't go there to actually, let's say, learn filmmaking. You obviously learn it, but he's like, you're not there to actually like hone the craft. You're there to network, and then you're going to get into Hollywood production, producing.
Yep.
That's what you go for.
Yeah, there's a track that you're on when you go. And so like the thing I did love about Full Sail was I learned the what and the how. Like I was deep in it. I left there with, I had 4 pieces of flash fiction published. I had 2 short screenplays finished.
Yeah.
I wrote a feature at the end of my time at Full Sail. Excuse me. It was a very bad feature, but I finished it. It was like 87 pages. It was a horror film.
Is that the you got the Jennifer Lawrence story?
Oh yeah.
You gotta
did I tell that story already?
No, not yet.
Oh, okay.
Oh, you the last podcast we did, that was like 2 years ago or whatever. You got to go through this because I think it's great.
Okay, so I'm at the end. So I'm at the end of my time at Full Sail, and like I said, I had 4 pieces of flash fiction published. I had 2 short screenplays like ready to go. My plan was to go out to Los Angeles and go start to work on sets and get out there. I had a family friend who lived in LA, so I knew I could go stay somewhere for free for a little bit, get some restaurant jobs, do my thing, go work on some sets, and then make my short films. So the last class that you take at Full Sail is a portfolio class. I don't know how they do it now, but back when I went, it was a portfolio class. So you work on your website, you pull your portfolio together, like everything that you have written, if you have any treatments or log lines or whatever. This woman had gone through the MFA program at one of those prestigious ones out in LA. Awesome woman. She smoked cigarettes and I did at the time too. So we would their kids, all the other people I went to school with were kids. I was a military student, right? I was 24 years old when I graduated, something like that. And so these guys are all 18, 19, 20 years old and no jobs, whatever, no disrespect, but it was just different. So I really connected with the professor. So she and I at after every class would go out and have a cigarette and chat or whatever. So my portfolio was done a week into the class, because I knew what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to go to LA. I knew what I had, I kind of knew what my voice was, what I want to try to go do. So probably it's a second or third week of class, we're sitting there, and she goes, all right, I'm gonna do an exercise. I want you to write a log line for a film that you have an idea for. So not one that's finished, not one that you've started writing, but one that you have an idea for. And we'll do a little exercise to kind of go around the room and talk about it or whatever. So we wrote 3 log lines, put it in a Crown Royal bag. She passed around the class,
Yeah.
She gets a phone call. She put this whole thing on. She had to have. She gets a phone call during the exercise. And she goes, she says, hello. She goes, yeah, for sure. Okay, cool. Hangs up, puts it down, and puts the phone down and goes, does anybody have a log line for a horror film? Did anybody write one for a horror film? And I looked around, nobody said anything. I was like, I did. Mm-hmm. And she goes, are you prepared to pitch it? And I was like, I mean, I can be. What are we doing here? She picks up her phone, she calls that number back. And she goes, yeah. What's your idea? And I was like, well, who is that? And she's like, well, what's your idea? And I was like, well, can I just come pitch it? And she goes, sure. So she puts it on speakerphone and we hear Jennifer Lawrence's voice. Mm-hmm. Turns out that she was Jennifer Lawrence was on Reba or something back in the day, one of those sitcoms, mm-hmm. Back in her first years in LA. And this woman worked on the show as a PA or something, and they became friends. So she puts Jennifer. She goes, this Jennifer Lawrence. She's looking for a horror script that she wants to produce for her friend Bradley. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I looked at the guy and I was like, Cooper?
Yeah.
You're talking about Bradley Cooper? So she goes, pitch it. So I was like, can I come up there? And she goes, yeah. So she puts her phone down on the corner of the desk and I stand there and I said, hello. She goes, hey, what's your idea? And so I told her the log line and pitched her the idea. Basically the log line for, it was a modern version of Beauty and the Beast, but if Gaston was a good guy. Mm-hmm. So if the Beast was the bad guy, but Gaston was the good guy. And she goes, oh, that's really interesting. How long would it take you to write it? And I was like, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I could sit down and write. She's like, well, if you can get it written in the next week, send it to Mara, and then Mara will send it to me. Mm-hmm. I said, are you serious? And she goes, yeah, Bradley's really interested in looking at horror scripts right now. That's he wants to direct. That's one of the next things that he wants to do. He wants to tackle horror films. If you remember, he was in that movie, Midnight Meat Train.
Oh, Jesus.
You remember that movie?
Way back then.
Crazy movie. And I guess like he really likes the horror genre. So like he wanted to start, obviously he's gone on to direct incredible movies that have, you know, won Oscars and all that stuff. And like produced at a very high level. But this was like before he did A Star Is Born and Joker and Maestro or whatever. So he wanted to start small, I guess, with like an indie horror film. And I was like, all right, sure. So I literally went and like hung up the phone and I looked at Mara and I was like, was that real? Like, is that really her? She goes, yeah, write it and get it to me. So I spent the next week in that class, like in class and then at home, like staying up and I wrote, you know, 87-page horror film. It was terrible. I sent it to her. And she said she read the first 20 pages. Yeah. And this is like a thing you learn when you're working in the narrative space, the Hollywood space, the kind of indie film space is like, most people, when they read scripts, are not going to read the entire thing like right away. Yeah, they'll read the first 20 pages or whatever, kind of do some coverage on it. And so she read the first 20 pages and then she's like, yeah, you know, she had some notes on it or whatever. And she's like, yeah, if you finish this up, like send it my way. I just let it go. Like it was a great lesson for me. It's a fun story to tell. Obviously it's like a kind of a cool, you know, like celeb name drop kind of thing. Yeah. But the lesson that I learned from it was, this is a job, this is a business. And like when you're not just writing things that you want to write and you're not just like writing for fun, like as you're on your way out of film school or as your way into the industry, like you're writing for people who are going to try to make something. Mm-hmm. And if it's not makeable, then, you know, and if you're not interested in it enough to keep it going, or if you can't dismiss that disinterest enough to get a really quality script written, like you're toast. Yeah.
How high were you though that like week? I mean, dude, you know what I mean? Like, you're like, I'm fucking doing it. I'm going. You know, dude, I'm going to Hollywood.
I was in like a fugue state. You know what I mean? Like I was like, I lived with two people. They're married now, roommates. I told them the story. They're like, dude, no way. I'm like, yeah. So I was like up at the kitchen table. Like all night. And I was like, told my dad about it. And he was like, is that real? I was like, I don't know, man. Like it sounded like her. You know, it sounded, I don't know.
You always read the crazy stories. You know, it's always the success ones you hear, not the failures. But it's like in your head, especially as a filmmaker, you're like, this is it. You know, they're going to find the script. The thing is going to be amazing. Yeah. I'm off to the races. You know, you could be that one lottery ticket. Yeah, you know,
for sure. But those thoughts crossed my mind. But like I also started to like during that process develop a really good relationship with imposter syndrome. Yeah. Because I realized I'm like, holy shit, like I'm writing for Bradley Cooper and Jennifer Lawrence right now. And it definitely affected the way that I wrote some of the characters. I was like, maybe Bradley will want to play this one and maybe Jennifer will want to play this one. All of a sudden I started thinking about things in a way that I wasn't prepared for as a, you know, recently separated Airforce veteran, recently or soon to graduate, you know, film school graduate. Like I wasn't ready for that kind of thing. Like I had no idea how to do that. And like, so I really developed a good relationship with imposter syndrome because I definitely felt imposter. Like I was, like you said, really high at the beginning of that process. It was a slog to finish that script. Yeah. Like I said, it's not very good. I went back and reread it like last year or 2 years ago. There's some good stuff in it. Like there's some good scenes. There's some good dialogue. Like I write pretty good dialogue. There was some, but it just like the story just didn't work and didn't make sense. And then now it's not something I'm interested in going back to. Mm-hmm. So the lesson there was really helpful for me to be like, okay, this is a business. Like these are, if you have to be really honed in. You have to have a really strong craft. You have to have a really strong voice. You have to really know what you're doing here and how you're doing it. And then there's the relationships you're going to have to navigate, you know, and like back to what I was saying about Jack interviewing him a year after I asked to, like golden ticket style, like what if she would have been, oh my gosh, I love this script, I want to buy it, you know, and then I get super high. It's like, oh my gosh, Jennifer Lawrence bought my script or optioned it or whatever. And then I'm kind of sitting around waiting for that. What ended up happening was I just went out to LA, I dropped that script, I started working on sets and I made my own short films and like got into it and learned it from the ground up, which was, you know, I think looking back, probably the most valuable thing. I would hate to have been somebody who made it early and didn't actually have to grind or struggle with the things that I've had to struggle through in the industry. Yeah.
No, I agree. I think, like I said, depends on what you want to do, but I agree. I think that you see the successes, you know, and everyone, it's like a lottery ticket for everything. You know, like when people talk about films, like I'm still, even in my head, I'm like, this is still a going to Everest. Yeah. You know, and I think the best filmmakers, it's networking. I think you probably know a bit better than I do. But sometimes it's just like the fact that you, one, get a script, that's already winning the lottery. 2, you get it funded, that's winning the lottery. 3, you get it made, that's winning the lottery. 4, it's good.
Yeah.
Like it's good. It's a good movie. Like people, that's a good movie.
Yeah.
That's winning the lottery. And then you get into theaters, and then it makes money. Is winning the lottery. And then people are like, that's a really good. That's like winning like 7 times in a row.
Nobody wins the lottery once, let alone 7 times.
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
I think it may be in our level. I mean, when you do, if Fox is backing you, they're going to make sure it's a winner. But in that same process, though, you want to. Yeah, like jumping into it and being like, oh my God, like, you know, without some of those experiences, like you're going into the meat grinder without knowing. I mean, like, you know, if somebody threw me a $20 million film right after film school, it would have been horrific.
Yes.
Like horrific.
Yes.
You know, like even now I know I could handle it, but I'd still need, you need the help. It's a team thing. It's not like when people are like, man, Tarantino knows what he's doing. I was like, Tarantino doesn't know how to run a 35 millimeter camera.
Right.
He doesn't. You know, like they're like, well, he only says he shoots on film. Yeah. Well, guess who his DP is? You think that DP actually puts that camera together, that 70 millimeter Panavision? It doesn't.
Yeah.
You think that camera operator puts that crane together? He doesn't. You think that camera, you know, like that grip puts the, you know, you know what I'm saying? Like our electric, it's a whole thing. You have a team, and I think when people think it's like they do everything, or it's just like a, you know,
being an auteur or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Like, oh, I just.
Well, Christopher Nolan talks about that. He's like, I am a master of no trades.
Yeah.
He's like, I'm really good at. I have good taste, and I know how to put teams together, and I know how to put the right people in a room, and just maneuver them where they need to be in order to make the things. And that's that was the lesson that I learned right away. Like getting out to LA, I got on a film set for a web series. And I went and interviewed for this unpaid PA position in the assistant director department. And these guys were like, you know, we're not going to pay you, but, you know, you can come learn how to do this. And I was like, great, I need to do something. Had a little bit of savings. I was like, I'll go do that. And then all the other assistant directors quit. And then at the end of the 3rd day of prep, I'm the only assistant director left. And these guys were like, can you do this? And I was like, we don't really have a choice here, guys. There's nobody else to be the assistant director here. So like, I guess I'll just figure out how to do it. And so that's what I did. It's like, being the assistant director, the only assistant director, I had a unit production manager, right, who was like handling, budgeting and high level scheduling and things like that. But I was scheduling each day, and I'm sitting there with the director and the DP. And then the 2 writers of the web series were also the 2 stars. So I had this like understood talent in front of the camera, understood director, DP, and then I learned all of the other departments because they had to interface with me in order to run the day, right? So hair and makeup and wardrobe and grip and electric and camera and all these different things. So like everything you just described, like I sat in the middle and watched all of that, and I realized exactly what you just said, which is, oh, this is a team effort. And I immediately made the connection to the flight line, right? Because I loaded bombs on fighters, and you know, when you're armament and you're loading the bombs, you're not the only one doing something that matters for that jet, right? For the mission, you know, it's like help you guys who need CAS on the ground, right? Like it's really important to have bombs on airplanes and missiles on airplanes and gun ammo in airplanes, but the crew chiefs have to do their thing, avionics troops have to do their thing, engines troops have to do their thing, and then the armament troops can do our thing, right? And so as I'm sitting there as the assistant director, I'm looking at like, oh, this is just like the flight line. Hair and makeup is like avionics. Wardrobe is like engines. You know, G&E is like crew chiefs. We're like, like whatever. And so that's also when it kind of flipped from, I was still interested in writing and being creative, but I really started to love production and to run a team. And I saw the frameworks that I had from the military really helped me. They kind of closed the gap between the things that I didn't understand about filmmaking and production. I still didn't understand everything about filmmaking and production, but because I had this flight line framework, I was able to, I can kind of figure this out as I go because I'm not in charge here. I'm not the only one doing anything. I just need to make sure all these people have what they need to do the things that they need to do so that we can roll camera and, you know, shoot the scenes, right? And then, you know, you scale that up to an entire production. You shoot every scene, you shoot every day, and then you have everything in the can, right? And then, you know, I didn't learn anything about post for a while because I was just kind of on set. For that project. And then I did the same thing with the same crew. They hired me on, they paid me this time, not much, but a little bit. We went to Illinois and shot an ultra low budget horror film with some like C-list, B-list talent. So I started to just continue to iterate and learn just a little bit more. And on that one, I was the assistant director and unit production manager on that one. And so I worked with the director and the executive producer and the screenwriter. I started to see like how a screenwriter works with a director and a producer. It's not just like, hey man, here's the script. go shoot it. It's like one of the screenwriter who's also an EP is on set working with everybody to try to understand like what we can actually accomplish that's on the page. And so I'm sitting in the production trailer on this feature with the screenwriter, the director, and one of the EPs. And the guy's like, oh, I got to rewrite this scene because this location that we have isn't actually going to work exactly the way that I wrote it initially. It's on the page right now. So he would do, rewrite the scene, and then I would schedule it, and then we would shoot it. And I'm just like, and I was like, so I started to view all of these things as like mini deployments, right? Like I would, I had the flight line framework, but then I kind of had this deployment framework where I'm like, oh, okay, we just need to go for 2 weeks and knock this thing out. And then when we're done with that, then we'll move on to the next one. So when we got back from that feature back to LA, I had these 2 short screenplays, and I'd asked everybody who was there, I was like, hey, I can't pay anybody, but you guys want to come, shoot a short film at a house. I've got a short screenplay that we can shoot in 2 days with a small cast. And we pulled the cast from the web series that we worked on, like a couple of other friends, and I pulled the crew. I used the AC was my DP because he was an up and coming DP, right? Mm-hmm. And so like he was like, yeah, I'll do that for free because nobody's asking me to DP a short film, right? Yeah. And so he's like, I'll DP the short film, and then we produced it, I directed it, we cut it, we put it on the film festival circuit, and it just started to do well. Not crazy well, but pretty well. And then I just started chunking it out and like really learning how each production worked, and then each production was its own contained thing, and then we just moved on to the next one.
Yeah. That's awesome. So what was that feeling like? Like you're moving out there. I mean, my film school experience, I guess I kind of approached it a little bit differently. It was like, I was super pumped in film school, definitely learned the craft of it.
Yeah.
And we did the short films, which then helped me be like, okay, this is how it kind of works. Obviously, once you get onto like unpaid, paid, it starts to expand. Yeah. But it really did show me how exhausting it is to be like your own DP, setting up your own, like I had to set up my own scaffolding to get one light shooting through, and it's an absolute nightmare trying to make sure, doing everything yourself, but seeing the teamwork aspect of it. We had people coming back from LA, back to Minnesota that went out, and then they kind of go back and forth. And it's, I don't know. I've never, my thing is like, you went out, which is awesome, but it was never my thing to be like, man, I really want to go to LA. For some reason, I don't feel the draw. I understand the draw. I understand it completely. I just never, I don't know. Like I guess I'm taking the hardest, longest way to try to direct a film, which is not do LA. But what was that like when you went out there and you're like, okay, you're old enough, you're older, you're not like 18 or 21, what was that feeling like? There's got to be like a lot of energy, but I don't say it's not depressing, but it's also like, okay, there's people, you're seeing people not make it.
It's super depressing.
It's okay. All right.
It's super depressing.
Because we had people come back and they're just like, yeah, and they were with famous actors, like in these short films, like real high end short films. There's like, yeah. And I was like, cool. Like that's really invigorating for me. But then I saw that and they're like, oh yeah, I'm back here. And I'm like, what are you doing? They're like, oh, we're saving up some money and then we're going to go back. And I'm like, okay, well, what's the plan? And I guess for me, that's where like what, when I finished film school, I kind of, as much as I wanted to do filmmaking, I felt like I needed to do more commercial. Let's hone it in. Yeah. Your look, your vibe, and then start trying to tackle, because I just felt like, I'd rather take shots at like a bunch of, and this is my own thinking. It's not right or wrong. It's like, when I found out what Ridley Scott did, where he made like 2,000, commercials, or even if you're making 100 commercials, like I felt like I could learn a lot with lighting and playing with commercial, even if that wasn't getting paid, to try to hone my skills in, and then maybe take a crack at it. But yeah, it's like, what was that feeling like getting out there and like running into these people? Because you're right in the thick of it. I mean, there's people probably coming in, people leaving. They're like, screw this town, I'm out. Like, what's that like? Like in your unpaid, paid. So you probably saw the good, the bad, the ugly. Yeah.
Well, yeah. I made a few financial mistakes early, right? Like the first short film we made, I didn't spend any money, but the next one we made, I co-produced it with two other people, and I put my portion on a credit card. And then I was working in restaurants, but it took me a while to get back into restaurants out there. And so, I was just putting life on a credit card, and Los Angeles is expensive. And, like my roommate was an actor who got residuals. And then, one of our friends, who was in the web series and in one of my shorts, like she was in some pretty big movies. So she had really good residuals coming in. And so, be like, hey, let's go to this bar. Let's go to this restaurant. Let's go do that thing. And, you're like young and you have $0 on credit cards. You're like, fuck it. Like, let me just like go do that, and the next thing you're in debt and you're like, oh, holy shit. Like I got to start, I got to start making some money at this thing. and you're living in an unhealthy way, right?
Well, what's that like too? I mean, like you said, they're in bigger stuff, and you're not saying you're their roommate, but like, what's that? That's
I was sleeping on the guy's floor.
Yeah.
I mean, for real.
Yeah, for real. That's what I'm saying. It's like that's what I'm saying. Like guys, where like even if you're making it, it's like it's still a struggle.
Totally.
Like, so
well,
my
like I said, my friend, she's been in some really big movies, and she has residuals, so she like does pretty well. But she's also a really good person. She's a really good person and a really good friend. To me and to other people, like she's a really good person, and she doesn't get the same looks that the bigger stars that she was in those movies with get, right? And we have lots of conversations about that, and I don't want to name drop, so I'm not going to say who she is and who these other movies are. Wouldn't be fair to her, but so I saw kind of all of it. And then my roommate was an up and coming actor who's also a writer. So he and I would write together, which was cool. So like he wrote a feature for me to direct. And so I would give him notes. I don't have like a story credit or a writing credit on that feature, but like, he would print a draft and I would, red pen, like we would go through it. And like, we went and talked to, this is a fun story. I'll name drop this one. He had an acting coach, that he used in general. And then I cast him in the second short film I made that he and I were co-producing together. And he went to this acting coach to work on this film. The guy like really liked my script, really liked working with this guy as an actor. And so I went to go to one of the sessions with him. We went out to his house and, he had makes pretty good money coaching actors and he does a little bit of screenwriting and stuff here and there. He had like a hot wife and we were like, went over there, we were like smoking cigarettes, talking about movies and talking about the craft and like doing this like cool stuff. Yeah. And at the end of the thing, he's like, hey guys, so because we had pitched, he had told him about this feature screenplay and we were like, we brought it to him during this last session of prep for our short film. We're like, hey, after the short film, we want to make this feature. Like, can you help us take it out? Because that's what you have to do in LA. Like, hey, I need help getting this script in front of people or getting actors attached because all actors, like all human beings, have a number of dollars attached to them in a database that you can go to a bank in LA and say, Bradley Cooper is going to be in my movie. Here's a signed, contract with Bradley Cooper to make this movie. The bank will say, oh, well, he's worth this much dollars.
No shit. Like that's a real thing.
It's a real thing.
Wow. I did not know that.
Yeah.
No.
So we were like, who do we know? Like who would like this script? And that's the messy kind of gross part of some of it, but also it's the business and you kind of have to do it.
Yeah.
So anyway, he's like, I've got some bad news, fellas. I really like your script. I'd love to help co-produce it and do that. He's like, but one of my friends is, he wrote a show. It takes place in Montana. So I'm moving to Montana and I'm going to go work on this with him. I'm going to be in his writer's room. Kevin Costner's in the show. So hopefully it does pretty well. Now, that was Yellowstone.
Yeah.
That guy wrote and worked on Yellowstone for the next, several years,
that's
obviously.
Amazing. Yeah.
And so like that's just what happens in LA, right? And he was a super cool guy. Like I'm not throwing shade at him at all, but he was like, I'm out. I'm going to Montana. Yeah. And he had to go do what he had to go do. And so like the connections that we had and the interest that we had just kind of dropped for that feature script. We'd spent a lot of time working on it. And it just like wasn't gonna happen anymore because this guy had to go take the opportunity that he had, and like I'm not gonna, obviously super happy for him, and he did a great job on that show, and like it did really well.
Yeah, little show called Yellowstone.
So I mean, to directly answer the question, like being out there is really depressing. It's really hard because I'm like you, like I want to make, like I want to do stuff. I don't want to be out here like philosophizing and, negotiating relationships with people that I don't even really know. And again, dude, if I would have directed that, it was like I don't know, $850,000 movie. Like it wouldn't have cost that much for us to make it, depending on what actors we got into. It's like $1 million, maybe. Yeah. I was not prepared. I directed 2 short films. I had, AD'd a web series, a feature film, and then another web series. But I wasn't ready to do that. So like, I actually think the track that you're on is a pretty smart one because again, if I would have gotten that opportunity, it probably would have flopped. Like even if we got I worked with a really big name actor one time as an AD with a really good director, mainly a theater director. But he was trying to get into film. And I watched this big name actor, bully this guy.
Yeah.
And I was the first AD, so I had to maneuver both of them, right? Like I had to have the director's back, but I also had to make sure this scene got fucking shot. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I'm watching this big name actor just be like, move. And he started directing the scene. And he was in the scene. And I watched this director who's, the guy was in his 50s. Like he'd been directing theater in LA for a long time, like very well established, very well connected, very kind, very good at his job. Like, but he was in over his head with this particular actor in this particular film project. And I'm looking at this and I'm like, man, I'm not ready for any of that yet. And B, I'm definitely not interested in it right now. And so I have to, just like I had to go to the military to grow in experience and get a little bit more mature, to go to film school, to then go to LA. Like now that I'm in LA, I need to continue to have some more experiences at the level that I'm at and maybe push the boundaries a little bit, but not jump too high. So that's the lie of Los Angeles, is that you'll get out there and you'll make it and you'll do really well. It is just not that. It is a slog. It is a grind. It is a nasty place. I don't want to disparage it too much at the moment because most of it burned down recently. But it is just like it's not a great place to go. Like it's only a great place if you make it, and even then, if you make it, you hear all these stories now. These people later in life are like, I didn't like any of the stuff that I did, and I didn't like any of the people I did it with.
Well, I think the thing too is I think we talk about a little more. I think the information, the stories are out there way more, especially with like YouTube, like even podcasts. You can sit down and listen to your favorite stars from the 2000s and talk about the horrific shit they went through. Like while they're on set. And you think back in the day, you're like, oh my God, this must be phenomenal. There's just parties and you're making money. But it's like, we had a fun little brain exercise. It wasn't so much a class, but it was part of our class where my professor, and actually should be linking up with him soon, he's our screenwriting one. And he had won, it's not an Academy Award, but it's like part of the Academy where if you write a screenplay, but it's not a film. So they select it. I can't remember what it's the McKnight Award or something like that.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So it's like an Academy Award, but it's not
for
made.
A screenplay.
For a screenplay, but it's not made.
Yeah.
So he won that back in like mid 2000s or something like that. He goes out there and he said the same thing. He's like, yeah, dude. He was like, yeah, you're making so much an hour, but you're living in a house with 10 guys sleeping on floors and you're out doing 12, 14 hour days. You're living off pizza. And this was back in the 2000s, and like, and so none of the stories they would say, but he would talk about the morality of things. This was I went to film school in 2014, 2016. And a lot of the stuff was starting to come out of like, well, what if you're on a set and the actress is uncomfortable, or the actor's yelling at the director is abusive?
Yeah.
What do you do?
Yeah.
And and like there's no right answer. He didn't like, well, stand up for it. It's like, no, you're not, because you're a PA. What are you gonna do? And I'm not saying anybody was in that situation, but he like brings it up from other cases that had happened. Yeah. It was like it's not a fun place to be, and everyone's ego is through the roof, or you have to deal with something, or like, and it's like, and then at the end of the day, you're just making a movie. Yeah. So then, but there's millions of dollars on the line, and then you got to stroke this actor's ego, because even if they're a shitty person, they're gonna make your money back, and like all the gross stuff, like the
Harvey Weinstein and all that stuff.
Harvey Weinstein, the casting couch.
Yep.
This was before Harvey Weinstein came, like that that stuff came out. Yeah. So like we were taught, he's like, yeah, it's been a running joke since, or it's not a joke, but like since the 30s. And we talked about that in class. Like we kind of had like a little session one day. It was like, this is the nastiness of Hollywood. This is the gross stuff. Like the casting couch it's a joke, but it's not a joke. It's like a real thing. And this was all before Harvey Weinstein came out. And he's like, that's real.
It's a joke. It's a joke because people use it, make it a joke to cope with just how bad it actually is.
Like, I had to do that.
So I don't think you're being disrespectful by calling it a joke, because you're describing it like for what it is. Yeah. And I saw it. I never saw it happen on a set, but I have talked to big name actresses who have since come out and talked about some of those experiences. And it was like, I'm like, oh man, I don't want to be a part of that at all.
Yeah, exactly.
I had Brendan Rooney on the podcast, Marine Corps veteran. His wife is Christy Carlson Romano. You remember her from Even Stevens was the Shia LaBeouf show on Disney Channel. She was Kim Possible. It was like the animated thing on Disney Channel.
I mean, like I know of it. I wouldn't watch it, but I know.
Dude, her story's crazy. She and her husband Brendan, he's a great guy. Been on the podcast, Marine vet, super cool dude. They were the first ones to start a podcast company about the nostalgia, right? So like they would do like podcasts about Full House, like the Full House cast would come on. Cool. Like the Office ladies do that podcast where they rewatch like these guys started with all the Disney shows and Nickelodeon shows. And then because people started talking about that on their podcast, then they did that documentary about the guy, the Nickelodeon producer who's doing all that.
Oh, they did. They produced that?
No, they didn't produce it, but they were like, they were on the forefront of, they were on the forefront of talking about the nostalgia of the shows that like we grew up on or our friends grew up on, depending on what you liked when you were a kid.
Yeah.
I watched a lot of Disney Channel original movies. I'm not going to lie. Shout out Brink. But but yeah, so they were the kind of first wave of the nostalgia thing. And then because people started talking about their experiences, their good experiences making the shows, then they started to get comfortable talking about the negative experiences. Yeah. And then because Christy is a very self-actualized person and she was open and honest and vulnerable about her own experiences, these people started to get more courage to talk about it. And now it's become this more of like an open secret, and the Weinstein stuff happens, and then the Epstein stuff happens, and then you look at all this and you're like, oh, we don't actually, and then now you look at the technology that we talked about earlier, everything's democratized. Yeah. You don't fucking have to go to LA.
Exactly. Yeah.
You don't have to do that. You build the relationships with the people that you're working with in Minnesota or Orlando or New Orleans or Atlanta or wherever, Chicago, and you can just do it yourselves, because now this has kind of all been democratized.
Well, even brands too. I mean, social media changed the game for brands. So you don't have to go through a giant, I mean, you work with marketing agencies, but even like you get lucky, you get a connection with like a big brand. You're like, can you make our social media? I'm like, all right, cool. And now it's like two people and you get a great budget, you're making good money, or you land a big company. They have one aspect, like my professor landed a big contract for Best Buy. Yeah. And this was like the early days of like the probably like 2010s. I remember him telling me, he's like, I got a BMW that year, because he had gotten a massive contract, and it was simple. He's like, we shot it. He goes, I had an editor that could basically green screen out the product. It was like basically for their website that term, but it was like phenomenal because it did democratize. Yeah. You didn't need a massive agency to do this gig. It was like two guys out of their garage.
Well, and that's how I got into advertising. So I was in LA. Like I said, my wife and I went to high school together. We've known each other since we were 13 years old. We dated on and off. She played golf at Ole Miss while I was enlisted, and then she was in New York when I was in Florida, and then LA. And that could be a 2.5 hour podcast in and of itself. But moral of the story is we got back together. Yeah. We got back together when I was in LA and she was in New York. And I was having all these experiences, like making these short films, and it was super cool because we got reconnected, and she's like, hey, I'm really proud of you. Like you've chased your dream. Like I know you've wanted to do this for a long time, and you're out here making short films. Like I was able to share the Vimeo link with her, and I was like, this played at this festival, this played at this festival, and this girl was in this movie, and this guy was in that movie. Yeah. She's like, that's really cool. I'm like, it is, but it also fucking sucks. I was like, I was disenfranchised with the entire experience and the entire and what modality of all of it.
Well, what do you think? I mean, like, what makes people stay? Like, because we're talking about, because everyone we knew was like, dude, F that. Like, we're going to go make our own way somewhere else. I mean, do you know people that from your generation, I don't say your generation, but your group, you know what I mean? Like, have most people fled, or just because of technology, have people kind of done their own thing to kind of,
People have done their own thing. I've stayed connected with a handful of people. That woman I mentioned earlier, she and I are still good friends. I was out on a shoot in LA last year. She and I went on a hike together. We're still good friends. We keep in touch. A couple of my DPs I keep in touch with. I'll hire them every once in a while when I'm out in LA. But mostly on the acting front and some of the other, there's just a lot of people that they're stuck out there. They're doing the same thing. They keep getting hired for gigs, right? So they're making money. But I think they're just stuck feeling like they have to stay in LA and they have to take that track. Money's at,
or that's where they're.
It's the track. I don't think it's the money in the moment. I think it's the track, right? It's like, well, no, I want to make narrative films. This is where you make narrative films, and you kind of have to do it this way. But so I got reconnected to Andrea, and I told her this story, and this connects back to what you were just asking about. And so I was like, yeah, this is cool, it's fun, but I'm like, I wasn't ready to quit. I wasn't like, I don't want to do this anymore, but I was definitely A, in some debt. And then B, I'm like, I don't know how to do this anymore, because I made these short films. They're on the festival circuit. I'm connected to all these people. There's one guy left to go to Yellowstone, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, I'm stuck, right? Yeah. She worked with somebody who was married to a producer at Time Inc. Studios in New York City. And she's like, well, he's a producer and you're doing this stuff. Let me get you guys connected. So she connected us, and he goes, well, funny we're being connected here. I need somebody to crew up and direct some branded content. And I had no idea what branded content was. I had no idea what advertising was. Like I said, at Full Sail, we didn't talk about copywriting. Like, I don't know anything about advertising. I've seen commercials and I know what commercials I like, but like, I didn't know branded content, online videos, any of these things. So he explained it to me what it was, native advertising. This is for Disney Channel. It's about one of their shows, the lead actor. You're going to like interview him, direct him. We'll cut it with some B-roll from the show. And then some stock B-roll, and it'll kind of live on this website. I'm like, all right, cool. So we shot for a couple of days. He paid me a solid day rate. I could let go of some shifts at the restaurant. And we're having rat beers over the after we're done. And he was like, "What do you want to do?" And I was like, "Well, I want to make films. Like, I love production. I love directing. I love producing. I want to do this like for a living. I want to make a living at this." And he goes, "Here's what you need to do. You need to get into advertising. It's like you need to do advertising as your day job. Don't stop waiting tables and tending bar, right? Like, you need to make the money you need to make, but then get into advertising. Do that for a living." And this is what answers your question, because the people that you'll meet doing advertising, they do the craft every single day. The DPs shoot every day. The editors shoot every day. The gaffers light every day. They're doing it for the man, so they don't get to do fun, artsy stuff. So what you can do is 5 days a week, you work in advertising, and then on the weekends, you get them pizza and beer. You're not going to have to pay them because they don't get to shoot short films. They don't get to do fun stuff all the time because they're constantly working for brands, right? There's a very cynical way of looking at it, but I think his point was spot on. Yeah. So that's what I did. So Andrew and I got back together. I hated LA. I was like, I'm moving to New York. We moved to New York, and I just went and, I did that job from LA. Then I moved to New York, and I went to his office every other day. Literally just walked in, got a pass, went and knocked on his door, and I'm like, "What do you guys got coming up? What do you need help with? What can I do?" I write, I produce, I direct. Yeah. I had learned post at this point, right? So like I can post supervise, I can do different things. And he would just every third, fourth, fifth time, he's like, "Oh, actually, you'd be a fit for this. Oh, you'd be a fit for this." And I started to cobble together an advertising portfolio. And I'm just, there's more people in New York on the crew side, right, that do advertising than in people in LA. There's big agencies in LA, and there's like those crews get advertising work. But for the most part, like New York is the center for that. And I think to answer your question, most people don't take the pragmatic approach that I did because they feel like working for brands is selling out. Whereas working in LA is pure. It's for the craft. It's for the art. And listen, both things can be true, right? You don't have to just settle for the art and the purity and the cinema of it all. Like, dude, go get some experience doing shit that sells. Even, like I don't love all of the brands that I've produced advertising for, right? I don't love all of the products. Like there's a little bit of a trade-off. But what I've learned is there's certain work that produces results, and those results are sales results for those products and those brands that you're selling, right? And so now when we work in advertising, I was just putting a deck together on the plane I was telling you about, like, I've got things in my portfolio that for this brand that wants some work, I can say, here's the work that we've produced, and then here's the sales that have generated from that work directly. So I really learned this like very specific set of circumstances, experiences, like whatever it is that understood like what drives results. And it's more than just the box office, right? It's more than just like butts and seats. It's more than just getting lucky, right? Because there's just so much advertising work to go around. Yeah. And then really what I did is I started to like really, really fall in love with production there. Because as I started to cobble together an advertising portfolio, I really learned that I love the business side of it. I love producing work that sells things and then sells more opportunities based on the case study that you can develop based on the work that you've produced.
Yeah. And I love hearing that from you because I think for me, it's the opposite. Yeah. I think maybe because we were separated, because you went to Full Sail and you had like an MFA writer, I know, I can't remember which school you talked about, but I know which, like as a screenwriter, the professor.
Yeah.
But we had like an optimism, but also a very cynic professor.
You have one of my favorite stories. You told it on my podcast where it was like the end of a semester.
Oh yeah,
It was like the end of your first semester or like first year or whatever it was.
It was first year. Yeah.
And the guy was like, "Listen, guys, it's not too late. This is a really hard job. You can go be an accountant. You can go be a nurse. You can go do all these different things." Not disrespecting those fields. Yeah. But you were sitting. You were like, I was sitting in the back of the class. I was like, "Yes. Tell him how much this sucks."
Yeah. It was. Yeah. But it did because I don't know. Maybe because I was just like, I'd heard enough of the stories, and it's like even in my head, I'm like, I'm not going to LA. But this is going to suck. Like I was like, this is going to suck, but this is what I've done in my life. Like it's just going to be hard, but you love it.
Yeah.
And I remember it kind of early on, like, cause they were kind of cynics, but they were still in it cause they loved the craft. But I went and we had talked about this is 10 years ago now that I close to graduate, 8 years ago now. But we had talked even within a year or two about, after we were out of film school and some of the professors and some of they were like, what do you think we should improve? And I said, business. I was like, you should have a business course.
Yes.
Because that's where you make your money. Because I picked up on it. I'm like, oh, and YouTube was becoming like it was 2014 to 16, but YouTube was really finding its way. Like it had existed, for 10 years, but it wasn't what it was. I mean, it was really starting to find its feet in that era. And it was like, but there's all these brands, especially back then, were like, we'll give you money to go, because we need to advertise on YouTube. And it's like, I saw it was like, oh, I can do a bunch of small brands, which would be phenomenal. I would love to shoot for REI. I would love to shoot for Gatorade. I would love to shoot for all these brands. And so I came from that aspect. I was like, well, I can make money there.
Yep.
And maybe because I heard Ridley Scott say that, he's like, Ridley Scott self-funded his first film, The Duelists.
Yep.
And then he was well into his 40s.
Yep.
And so I was like, it kind of gave me a little bit of hope of like, well, and I view it as trigger time. Me getting behind the camera is trigger time. That means if I'm down in Honduras filming underwater, that's trigger time. If that's, working with a buddy on a short film that's crappy, that's trigger time. I remember doing that when I came back from Kuwait, and it was a pretty rough short film. Sometimes short films can only go so far if you have like a kid that's a 17-year-old acting like a doctor. Like it's not, it's rough. Like there's no amount of lighting that Deacons can do that would save this short film. So, which is fine, but it's still trigger time, and that's what it kind of came to me, I guess, in that aspect. And they were talking about that in our film school because they were still in it. They were making money and sustaining as a living, but they were cynical enough and but still optimistic to be like, look, this isn't going to be fun, but if you're willing, these are good routes to go because we've learned our lessons, And I think film schools, in my opinion, should teach that. Like you brand, because to me, I almost think branding first because that's where you can at least make your money. And you just get reps and reps and reps, and then it's like, okay, now we are gonna tackle a short or maybe a feature. Like there's a lot that goes into a feature, but there's a lot that goes into production. You get paid, you get to go over the world.
Totally,
it'd be phenomenal.
Well, and the principles of storytelling don't change, right? Yeah. Like the thing I was talking about this on a recent episode of my podcast. Like one thing that we all miss as veterans is deployments, right? Like if you deploy, you know that you're going to a specific place for a specific reason to do specific things to accomplish a specific task or mission, right? Normal working people don't get that. Yeah. Like if you're an accountant, every January to April rolls around and it's go time and that's exciting. Doctors get that, right? Because surgeons and things like that, lawyers get that when they're in court. But like a lot of people don't get that. We get it. And I look at, that's why back to that deployment mindset, right? Like, dude, every commercial that I produce, every 30-second spot, the principles of storytelling don't change. Mm-hmm. So it's not a 90-minute film. It's a 30-second spot, but you still have to tell a tight story. Exactly. It still has to be first act, second act, third act, right? And then you add to it these components of, well, here are the RTBs for this brand and this product, right? Here's the CTA that we want somebody to come away with at the end of this 30-second spot or 2-minute piece of branded content, whatever it is. And you also learn the difference between, brand storytelling and performance marketing, right? Like sometimes it's just, like the Super Bowl spots that are going to be running with Post Malone and Shane Gillis. Like that's just brand storytelling. That's just brand advertising. That's not performance marketing. They're not trying to sell a specific Bud Light product. They're just showing, hey, Bud Light is a fun brand with a fun comedian and a fun musician, and it's a party, like have a good time. You learn that versus the performance marketing of, hey, Gillette is launching an at-home beard care brand and we need this specific demographic to buy it at this specific cadence. And if the business doesn't scale, then our marketing is a failure, right? Like that's very different. But those are two big brands and they do different things. And so, you not just you can learn the craft when you're doing branded storytelling, whether it's commercials or branded entertainment, but like, I think that I've learned more doing advertising than I have doing narrative film. There's certain things that I learned in Hollywood doing the narrative stuff that pretty foundational to my career, kind of like learning how Genie works and camera works and hair and makeup and all those departments like I talked about earlier. But I've learned more about like storytelling and business from the branded stuff that we've done. And then you add to it the fact that advertising is changing rapidly. Brands want to tell stories. Yeah. You look at Yeti, right? Yeti produces long form documentaries. Oakley, North Face, like all of these like really cool brands. You guys did it at Black Rifle, right? Like the Presents series, like all these different things. Like you're telling stories that the brand is a part of, but isn't necessarily central to, right? So there's a lot of these like X brand presents this story, and then people like us get the opportunity to go in and tell the kinds of stories that we want to tell, and we're not necessarily hampered by product placement. Sometimes you are, but like those are the trade-offs. There's trade-offs in it. There's trade-offs in everything that we do, but the branded space is the space that I want to be in now. And like, you can pitch brands now. Yeah. You can be like, not just like RFP me for your campaign that you have a specific budget for, because those budgets are different for brands. Like brands are like, oh, our Q4 product launch, there's a budget for that. Well, they've got a bunch of dollars sitting over here to be like, we want to tell stories. We want to present some stories. So like, what are your ideas? And that's the really, really fun space to be in.
No, I agree with you too. Cause I think I remember kind of realizing that right out of film school, be like, cause it was that era of GoPros. It was the era of Devin Supertramp. Like, he was, his stuff, not to harp on him, but like you watch one video, you watched them all. He was like on the easy cam, get a bunch of people together. They would like, and then they'd throw in the can of Mountain Dew or whatever. But they were paying him a bunch of money, not a ton. I think in the beginning it was like 10 grand, then it went up and scaled. But it's being able to tell those different types of stories. Also, it's challenging. I mean, like you go on from, like I said, you go to Gillette, you go to Bud Light, or you go, REI to, Mari's to wherever you're going. I mean, even like, BBC, like I'd love to do, go film polar bears for 10 days, or something like it's still trigger time. You're still telling a story. You're still part of that machine. And everything I've learned has all been through that. Like it really has. I mean, I've worked on a few bigger, and honestly, when I get on bigger sets, I just feel happy because it's nice to be like, hey, can you put that light over there? And they're like, oh my God. Yeah. And like working with a grip that wants nothing to do but handle a light and grip is phenomenal. Yeah. They're not trying to be the next director. They're not trying to be the DP, but their knowledge is, and they're just like, yeah, man, sounds great. And you're just, everyone's having a good time. Everyone's got a good solid day rate. They've worked on a crap load of TV shows. Like their knowledge is like, they say if you ever direct a film, make sure your director needs a good DP, the DP needs a good grip, or whatever gaffer. Gaffer, and that because they're going to carry you through. Yeah, of course.
Well, because you need to be able to focus on what you need to be able to focus on. When you're doing the scrappy indie stuff is fun. Like we still do it, and I still want to do it. Fuck, we should make a short film, right? Like it's like those are fun things. But yeah, I agree. The trigger time is a really good way to describe it, because that's the thing that getting into advertising helped me with. I wasn't a door kicker or trigger puller, but I had to stay qualled as a bomb loader, right? We were in load barn monthly getting qualled on the bombs and the missiles that we were loading, right? And then when you're downrange, hopefully the op tempo is high and they're dropping munitions quite a bit, and then you're loading again, right? You're not just like arming and de-arming, for takeoff. And so that idea of like trigger time, that idea of like staying qualled is really, really important for anybody. But we're talking about filmmaking here, is like, dude, you need to be doing it. That I think back to that first conversation I had with Andrea when we got back together was like, she was like, well, what's hard about it? And I was like, I don't get to do my job every day. Yeah. I'm waiting tables and tending bar. It's social. I'm making cash. Like, I love that I had that experience, and I love that I'm a well-rounded human being. But like, I don't get to do my job every day. At that time, I viewed myself as a director. So like, even when I was assistant directing or producing, it still wasn't what I considered my job. And I was like, I directed 4 days this past year, right? Yeah. Like 2 days on one short film, 2 days on another. I was like, that's not a lot. Like, and so that's what getting into advertising, it was like, oh, I'm doing this every day. Yeah. I'm doing it every single day. Yeah. And then you're working with people, and then you're learning things from people. And you're just like building high quality relationships with other human beings who are like, oh, I've got this idea for a script, or like, oh, hey, I think you'd be a good fit for this other project that these guys are going to hire me for. Let me bring you on for it. And the next thing you know, you're mapping relationships across the industry. Yeah. I'll tell an anecdote about LA that was really hard. I went back, so I had moved to New York, working in advertising. This is the difference between New York and LA. I had an advertising gig out in LA. And so instead of using my travel expenses for hotel and rental car, I used my travel expenses. I stayed with my roommate, my old roommate, right? His girlfriend had moved in. I was like, can I stay with you guys for a couple of days while I'm working on this project? They're like, yeah, absolutely. I was like, cool. I'll use all my per diem and the, expense that I would have paid for hotel and car. We'll go out to like nice restaurants and, have a good time. And so I still do that and highly recommend it. If you're ever traveling for something, like keep the expense line item and just use it in other ways. Stay with friends, have fun. Like this is supposed to be fun. So we go back to our old bar and it was like, it was like pre-pro day or whatever. So I'd wrapped up early. It was like 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. We went back to our old bar in Sherman Oaks. We're sitting there. Shout out the Woodman on Woodman Ave in Sherman Oaks, great bar. We're sitting there. It's like one of those square bars, where it's like the bartenders are in the middle, the restaurants like all around. And he and I are sitting over here and there's another guy sitting at the other side. And my roommate was a narrative guy, right? He's an actor, screenwriter, producer. So he's like, dude, you're doing branded documentaries? Like, dude, tell me about documentaries. Like, what's going on? So we're having this really cool craft conversation and we're having this like really cool dynamic between the two of us that hadn't existed before. I watched this guy who's sitting on the other side start to creep his way over. Yeah. Inch by inch. Conversation's going for like an hour. He gets over to us and he's sitting next to my buddy and we're like looking at him like, dude, what are you doing? Like, whatever, it's a bar, fine. Yeah. And he goes, hey, I don't want to interrupt, but hey, here's my card. I'm an AC. If you ever need anything, just like, I'm here. And he's like pushing it. Yeah. I'm like, dude, I'm having a conversation with my friend. Yeah. Like get out, like leave me your card. Like by all means network but like don't be gross and weird about it. Like inject yourself into our conversation. Whereas when I moved to New York and I would meet my wife's friends, she worked in education at the time. Yeah. She had doctor friends, she had nurse friends, she had finance friends, she had different people. Like we'd be out meeting new people and having a good time. Be like, oh, what do you do? I'm like, oh, I'm in production. I work in, making films and advertising and stuff. Like, oh, that's cool. And then somebody else would be like, I'm a teacher. Here's the thing I was dealing with this. And they would be more interested in the teacher's story or the finance guy's story or the lawyer's story because in New York, it's a very well-rounded community of people who are doing a bunch of different shit. Whereas in LA, everybody's on the one track and it's just so focused. And again, I'm not saying don't network. I'm not saying don't introduce yourself. I'm not saying, but just don't be weird about it. Yeah. And that's the difference between New York and LA. And I think that's the difference between like people who work at this for a living and people who are trying to. Yeah. And it's just it's tough.
Well, I think it's finding your own path. Because even like I'm in Minnesota, but at the same point that dream still stays alive. But it's also I've had some great projects and I haven't moved.
Like when I talk to you about hiring you, I'm like, dude, what are your rates? I don't give a shit where you live. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm not going to cross-reference the per diem in Minnesota and be like, well, actually your rate should be this because no, it's like you have a high quality output. You and I are talking about some projects right now. Like I'm going to pay you what you're worth. It doesn't matter where you live. And then I'm going to pay your travel because you're the right person for this project, even if we're shooting somewhere else.
Exactly. Yeah. And like I said too, I think I think that the technology, the networking, just, and granted, Minnesota's a bit different, and because all my everything's out of state. Yeah. Everything's out of state. I think that's also the culture too now. It's like you find your crew, you find your people. Yeah. Like, all right, I guess we're going, I just went to Ukraine. It's like, all right, it's just me and that's pretty much it. I have Chris, he's our producer. Yeah. But he's also our fixer, so it's a little bit different. But yeah, I mean, it's you or even other places I've gone, it's like, all right, these are the people I rely on. Let's rock and roll. Yeah. I feel like, at least in Minnesota, it's like, it is a struggle of like, this is just our culture here. It's like, there's like you can make money here, you can make a living. Cause that's always the thing too, is like, there's only like maybe 2 or 3 people that made it, other people have a great career and they're, they have a family in it, but that's stuck in it and that's making decent money. Like Minnesota's a tough place to be in, and you can kind of in some areas, like I was just talking with my buddy who's done very well, but it's almost like there's different tracks. Like you almost start as a photographer and then you move in as like a DP, like everything's different. Like New York is much different than I was talking with Sarah. She's from one of the productions that's handling the Medal of Honor Museum. And I was with her for 2 days in North Dakota. And she was telling me her path. I was like, how did you do it? Like, how'd you get to New York? She's working with, what's the guy that, William Morris? Is the guy that does the documentaries.
Errol Morris?
So she was like working with him. And then she started in the 2000s. She's like, honestly, we found short documentaries like back in the that's what accelerated them. Now she's working with big, it's like you have to find your way. But yeah, I feel like you said that anecdote of, LA. It's that I think it just gives hope. I think people need to talk about that, where it's like you can do your craft without having to go there. I mean, it does really great learning lessons by all means, like I wouldn't mind getting on more short films. Like I wouldn't mind getting on more of that, but also that trigger time of like, let's get behind this brand. Let's get, let's make a 90-second, 30-second, 60-second commercial.
Yep.
I feel like, you're doing what you love. To me, I love it. I like I said, some of them are like, oh, they look their nose up at it. But I remember right away being in film school being like, that's where I want to be. Like, I'd rather be. Do
you want to be working every day or do you want to be hoping to work?
Exactly. That's what
it comes down to.
Yeah. And the technology makes its own way. Like, if I'm not filming, I love the whole craft itself. Like, I love editing. It's a weird thing. I don't know. I just love it. Not to it actually propped up most, my income for a while before filming took over, actually directing cinematography, and being a cam op.
Yeah.
Editing kept me afloat.
Yeah.
But but knowing, I don't want to say every facet, but understanding that, like, that's I think a lot of people overlook with editing, not to go on an editing rant, but that's the third piece of a film. That's the third piece of advertising. You have your production or pre-production, production, post-production.
Yeah.
Post-production, a lot of people forget about when it comes to editing. Like, we just cut it together. It's like, no. Like, when it comes to mini docs and documentaries or, stuff like doing it, probably a little more straightforward with like 30-second spots. You only have so much time. But like, still though, there's still, what's the music? What's the tone? What's the cutting? Like, how long do you stay on a shot? Like, all these things come into play. The film is made in the third time in the edit. You can completely change something. Like, even with working with John at Vet TV, like, there's certain moments I was like, this has to be here. This music, this shot has to hold on.
Yeah.
When this guy gets his leg blown off. This is where the crescendo comes in play. This is where the buildup and the payoff comes in. And this is gonna, cutting to this shot is gonna really, and holding on, it's gonna bring out the emotion. So
you're describing the value of being a multifaceted creator, right? Like I talked earlier about like how I didn't take the camera route, I didn't take the editing route. I did edit 2 of our short films. Took me forever, right? Because I'm not a trained editor, but like I figured it out and it really helped me as a storyteller. Yeah, and you're right. There's 3 aspects. There's 3 parts to writing. You write the script, then you shoot the script, and then you edit the script, right? And like that's true for a film, and it's true for a 30-second spot. If you do all 3 stages well enough, you're preparing for the next stage as you do it. So you're not just writing the best idea that you can think of. You're actually writing something that you can shoot. And then when you're shooting, you're not just shooting everything you want to shoot. You're actually shooting for the edit.
Yeah.
Right. So you're shooting for certain cuts, you're shooting for certain wipes, you're shooting for certain dissolves, you're shooting for certain things. And then in the edit, you're like, wow, either we did the first 2 stages really well, or each, different bucket of people did the first 2 stages really well. And now I can play with this edit in a way that allows me to have like multiple versions of it. Right. When I'm working on big campaigns for big clients, dude, our R1 edit is like 15 different versions. Yeah. Right? Because like they wrote it a certain way, we shot it a certain way, and now we're editing it and playing with it, and you refine it down to a final product,
I love how you said shoot for the edit. Because I some people were kind of confused when I was in film school, but I learned that too, is like shooting for the edit. Sometimes you're just like, I have this in my head, so we're and I remember people being like, why are we filming it this way? I was like, just wait till the edit. And then I'd show them the edit, and they'd be like, this is what angle you're doing it from. It's like, I think that's great it works for everything. Branding, short film, documentary, especially documentary. Like if you plan a little bit, documentaries can be a whole beast in itself. But like when you have a shot list, like in my head, I'm like, this is going in the edit. Like I'm shooting Ukrainian flags. There's thousands of them. These are the shots that I need because I know this is going to be a pivotal moment. Yeah. And where it finds itself sometimes gets a little muddy, but then it's like it's going to make the edit. You know, and same with just sometimes editing. Like how does a fight scene, you shoot for the edit. It's going to look weird when you can't just like, we got coverage and let's go. It's like, well, when you shoot for the edit, that's when I think the styles come into play. You know, I think that might be film nerd talk. I think that's when you have like the great filmmakers, you shoot for the edit. Nolan knew doing that push in on the mask at the beginning of The Dark Knight, that's a shot for the edit. That's a trailer shot. That's like, as much as you want to be like, film nerd, whatever, that's a commercial shot. That's just like,
but it also worked well for pacing the film and opening the film in a way that says like, this is going to be a slow psychological move towards understanding who represents this mask. Right. And like, that's, that wasn't Bruce's story. That wasn't Batman's story. That was Joker's story. Right. And he knew that. So it worked on multiple levels, which back to people who want to be binary and separate marketing from storytelling, like, Nolan is a master of none of the crafts on set, but he gets final cut. He also gets approval on all marketing materials because that guy knows how to make films, but he knows how to sell films too. Yep. And he knows if he wants to keep cinema alive, which is something he wants to do, he wants us to go to the theater to watch movies. Well, then I have to sell it. It's like these things are integrated. Yeah. I also think like I've met lots of people who are like, oh man, I keep getting editing gigs, but like, I'm just going to switch to shooting. I'm like, are you going to make any money? How are you going to fund the things that you want to shoot? So it's like this idea of, I did this back in the early days of advertising. It's like, I want to be a director, but it's like, well, this offers me an associate producer role. Like I worked with a director doing a lot of branded documentaries where he was a really good director, really good visual director, but he was not great at writing questions. And then he found out that I was really good at writing questions and drawing information out of people, both emotional information for the documentary side and brand information for the branded side, right? So I would write his questions for him and then sit next to him and take the notes and then pass it to him and be like, well, actually say this next question this way because this person did this. Yeah. And so, that was like he let go of a certain portion of his ego to allow me to come in and play in that sandbox. And then I let go of a portion of my ego thinking, well, I want to be the director. It's like, no, I want this opportunity to sit next to a director while he interviews, this is branded documentary. So we're big brands. We're interviewing lots of celebrities. Like I get to sit there next to him and help him write these questions. Like my ego has no other place to sit except for what can I do right now to help this guy get this out of this person so that this project moves forward. Yep. So as you're describing like editing being a majority of your income for like last couple of years, well, like you said, you're learning craft. Like you're understanding the next time you go get that trigger time to go shoot as a DP, you have all of those hours editing. So like, oh, actually, this shot will work better if I do it this way because I know either I'm going to need it in the edit or the editor is going to need it in the edit. Yep. So this idea of like, well, I'm just going to focus on one thing is just silly. It's like back to what we said earlier. Like you don't just make it as an actor anymore. Yeah. Like all of these actors in Hollywood are producing too. Yeah. They're building their own production companies. They're producing with other actors. They're putting themselves or other people in their films. Like this whole thing it needs to be an integrated approach. It can't just be like a siloed, I'm going to go live my dream and do this. We're not all going to be Tarantino. It's just not going to happen. And I love your Ridley Scott example too, because like the 10,000 hours of making commercials got that dude the money to make his first film, which then obviously, avalanched to be able to make all the other films that he wanted to make. But the craft aspect, what he learned making things for brands to sell stuff, taught him everything he needed to know to then be able to go make films. And he never stopped making commercials. No. RSA still exists. I actually shot at their offices in LA several years ago. It was super cool actually. They have a parking spot for Tony. Oh, and Tony had passed away at this time. Yeah. And I have a picture somewhere saved on my Google Drive of like parking reserved for Tony Scott. Yeah. It's this like beautiful ivy wall and this gravel parking lot at RSA in Hollywood. And I'm a huge, back to the movies we loved. Like I love Tony Scott. Yeah.
I found that when film school. I loved the movies he had made. Yeah. And didn't realize that was him. Yeah. It was like, and I like went back and rewatched them all. I'm like, oh my, and then you see his style and you're like, dude, I think. And Ridley said it too. He's like, he was more talented than I was. Yeah. And then you look at his films, you're like, I don't know if talent's the right word, but I'm like, he definitely helped push that commercial style. And then you see, well, it wasn't Ridley Scott was influential on Michael Bay. It was Tony Scott. Mm-hmm. So Tony Scott was more than an influential filmmaker when it came to, I always say commercial cinema. Yeah. Because you had traditional. Yeah, AAA blockbusters. I would say, I always use commercial as like, that's the next level. Like you have cinema, which is, great. People do their, but like when you have you realize what's commercialized, the B-roll and the insert shots are phenomenal. Yep. They're using Dutch angles. The lighting's harder contrast. There's like, it's
just second units and third units. When you're making an indie film, it's you.
Yeah, exactly. You're like straight on. You're like, might get a twofer and you're like, all right, cool. Like this will work, but And I agree. I think it's just that when you go back to what they were doing, they were making commercials the whole time. And then like Tony Scott was making BMW and they're still making them. And I think, and then I think if you listen to again the history of like when you're in the special features, that 90s, 80s, 90s generation, Ridley Scott and them were making commercials. Well, the next wave was music videos.
Yep.
And then in that was kind of
Fincher. Fincher got to start making music
exactly.
videos. Yeah.
Fincher, Michael Bay.
Yeah. Trent Reznor
Trent Reznor.
Scores films now, right?
Yeah,
because he's a musician and worked on those music videos with all those guys.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like you kind of see like what we're talking about is they did that, but it was in that pipeline still. So it was like their trigger time. I think it was Schwartzman. I can't remember his first name, but he's the DP that was for. I think it was Bad Boys. If not, it was definitely for The Rock, Armageddon. And he goes, we learned on the Michael Bay. Music videos, but he goes, we got to play with everything. That was their trigger time. He goes, him as a DP in his 20s, because again, that was the era they were there. It was like you're just kind of hitting the right time in that era. And he talked about it's phenomenal, especially if you're a film nerd. He's like, we got to play with all the lenses these old DPs from Hollywood would never touch. They never touched snoot lenses. They never touched 8mm. He goes, we were playing with Panavision. He goes, in fact, the rental houses would come to us and say, do you want to try this new lens that we got? And because they were filming back to back to back music videos, now I'm sure they did ads as well, like commercials. Yeah. But that was they went from nothing to the most trigger time than the old Hollywood DPs, because the old Hollywood DPs would be on a shoot for months, but it was the same look, same angle, same, like they, and nothing against that. But if you're trying to make what Michael Bay was making, how do you make a car chase faster than it looks? How do you make all these things, these storytelling blocks or effects almost? How do you make that? And they figured that out. Like The Rock, when he talks about The Rock and how he knew exactly, which I think I do admire about old DPs on film, is they knew exactly the stop of like what would translate to the big screen, because they had shot on film so much. He's like, we were just like quarter of a stop under here, but over here was exactly zero. It wasn't even a stop, so he knew exactly. And it looks phenomenal. It looks amazing. And they're shooting slow-mo, and it's like they knew exactly how to bounce light, and it was nuts.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I learned early in my life from my grandma was, reading all of these novels and then watching all of these movies, right? Like my dad showed my brother and I, Aliens, Predator, Commando, Terminator 2, right? Like all these different, like we watched all of those, and then we watched, all the action films and the comedy films. And then my grandma liked those movies too, but she would show me the old movies, and then we would read these thriller novels, and then she'd show me old literature. So from an early point in my life, I learned that each of these things have their place, right? And going to film school and being on film sets and working with a bunch of other artists, it's really easy to see people get like purist really fast, right? Like, well, that's not cinema, that's not film. It's like, okay, it's not, but what can we learn from it? And we're also still allowed to enjoy it. You know what I mean? Because now we look back at The Rock, and we look back at Con Air, and we look back at Armageddon, and we're like, well, those are actually brilliant films.
Yeah.
That's brilliant storytelling.
They
It's
hold
brilliant
up.
acting. They hold up. And there's a lot of movies that don't, right?
Yeah,
Don't get me wrong.
Yeah,
Nobody's perfect and nothing's going to be perfect. But this idea that, like, I don't know, it just seems like we're circling this thing. It's like, this isn't binary, right? Like, we have our taste and we have our desires and we want to go make some stuff. But at the end of the day, like, do as much as you can. You remember the movie Finding Forrester with Sean Connery?
A long time ago. I mean, I think I watched it one time.
It's in my, He was a writer, and there was a basketball player who was like on scholarship at the local Catholic high school or whatever it was, and they would like meet up. I don't know if it was a true story or not, but Sean Connery's character was like this high literary figure, and they would read all this great literature, and then they would sit down to eat, and he would like read trash magazines or whatever. And the guy's like, I thought you were like a big literary guy. And Sean Connery's character goes, well, I read everything. He's like, that might be my dinner, but this is my dessert, right? Like, and I'm able to like learn things from this kind of, pulp fiction and this kind of literature. Like they're not mutually exclusive, right?
Yeah. And I agree with you too. I think watching, I'm not a huge, we're talking about this, not a fan of old black and whites. I'm not like, it was boring to me. I have zero desire, but when I'm forced to watch it, I'm actually like awesome. That's what I loved about film school, because we had the cinema history class. And so it forced me to watch the films that it's like, it's like my wife went through one film course and now everyone's a critic, or they're like, oh, you saw Citizen Kane? Like, oh, have you seen Citizen Kane?
Rosebud.
Exactly. Like, oh my God, now I'm an amazing critic, And so, but I did get to sit down and watch the French New Wave films and got to watch, and I understand why they are epic for their, or like they broke the mold. There was no mold to break, or there's no mold to break. Like which was phenomenal. I think that's great. They were the first, and so you kind of understand why they're part of cinema history. Like we watched one. He goes, check out this tracking shot. And it is. The opening movie is like one long 100-foot tracking shot on a track. Yeah. And you're like, cool. The rest of this movie sucks. Like, I don't know, but it's famous. But
then decades later, Sam Mendes does it for an entire movie in 1917. Exactly. And you're like, oh, shit. It's phenomenal. Like, these are building blocks.
Yeah, they're doing one take, which is great. Like, it's really cool. I think the one that really blew me away, Citizen Kane was like really good. And so, but then Casablanca.
Yep.
Like, and it's almost like what you said, there's those old films, the story is king. Like, it's truly king. Like, so you watch some of those, and the writing, the acting, like, because you didn't have the flash, that's what they did. Like, it came down to the story. And like, so Casablanca, it's not flashy, but the story's phenomenal. Like, I was like invested. I was like, wow, this is great, And obviously there's a lot more old school, where everybody learned everything from, and then I think things develop and they get more flashy. But you have to combine all of those together. A great story and now visuals are just to me, they got better.
Yeah. Have you ever seen the movie Hugo by Martin Scorsese?
Long time ago.
It was about, it ended up being
kid
George Milieu. About the shot to the moon. Is that old, like the first like VFX kind of thing with the shot to the moon or
something like that?
Rocket to the moon, something like that. Yeah. Like that was a really cool movie because like that had flash and like kind of had all the modern trappings of commercial filmmaking. But then you get to the end of the movie and you're like, oh wow, this is a story about story and about where we came from as filmmakers. It kind of had that meta quality to it, which is really cool. But yeah, I mean, Zack Snyder's done the same thing. Like last time he was on Rogan, I like Zack Snyder. Like, he makes weird movies, but like,
same.
But like, I loved his Justice League. I loved Batman versus Superman. Yeah. I loved Man of Steel. All of his movies are like super weird, but he has a very strong point of view, which I appreciate. So even if it's a movie I don't like, I'm watching somebody who's doing something very purposeful, very methodically. He made tons and tons of commercials and tons of music videos, and people give him shit for all of this, but he's like, I get to do what I want to do every single day.
Every day. Yep. And you also, again, it's that trigger time. So when he's doing those shots and he's, it's like, I always say this, I think with filmmakers, there's that middle ground of where they started and it's about that midway, and then they give them a little too much power. Or you know what I mean? Like, it goes in, then you have whatever Netflix movie came out.
Oh, Snyder's.
Oh,
not Dawn of the Dead, but
no, the most
Army of the Dead.
No, the most not even Army.
The Moon one, Planet Moon,
or something
like that.
Yeah. Wild off the rails, but it's fine. But I think even Dawn of the Dead, it was like, the Army of the Dead. I was like, okay, this is like but we're starting to stray. Yeah. But it's funny because everyone's like, the producers, they're like, the producers are holding them back or whatever. And I'm like, and then you start getting older, you're like, producers need to rein these guys in because this is getting a little like you're like, and this is the result. This is like Michael Bay with Transformers. Love Michael Bay. They go off the rails, and they're like, well, they're making money, and it's like, but let me just kind of rein it in a bit, like.
I think it was the Transformers series because I love the first one.
Oh,
I actually rewatch. My daughter and I talk about sometimes she's scared of certain things and not like showed her the GWAT guys like the opening of the first Transformers movies. Like, unbelievable.
Another great film. It's a great film.
And then the second one was good. And then I think Spielberg produced EP'd those, I think, with Michael Bay and Michael, they got to the fucking King Arthur one, the ninth one they made or whatever.
It's wild.
And Michael Bay was like, Steven told me I probably should have stopped after 3, but like, I don't know, here we are.
5.
Yeah. He's like, whatever it is, But that's the point, right? It's like everybody has a role to play. And that's the other thing that you learn in branded storytelling is like, the client has a perspective, right? Because it's their brand and their product. And so you're turning all of the creative into them so they have a perspective. You can't just be like, clients suck and don't know what they're talking about. Like, no, they have a role to play.
Right in the bill.
They're a marketer and we're a creative for specific reasons. So they have taste and understanding of what they need to sell their product, which means you have to respect that. Yeah. And at each stop along the way, everybody's involved. And that's why I think, for service members or veterans who want to get into storytelling and filmmaking, our foundation of skills and experiences, not pulling triggers or loading bombs or jumping out of planes or kicking down doors, but the experiences of being on a team, understanding a mission set, and working together with, the operators out there. Like, you need support troops, right? You need your intel troops. You need all these people to help you get on target and do the thing that you need to do. So I think military service members and veterans have a very specific set of skills and experiences that will help us in this industry, because we're not going to be jaded by some client who has a perspective, because we've all worked with a general who has a perspective.
Exactly.
And at the end of the day, you have to respect it and work within the parameters and accomplish the mission.
Yeah, I agree. And I think I talked with Joey about this, because he's worked on the bigger film sets. I'll just put like my face, like internal temps high, and I'm like,
put your photo from your first photo from
like,
basic from boot camp in there.
Yeah. So, anyways, not a big deal. So, Joey was talking about that because he worked down in Louisiana, and then again, like you're talking about LA, like a lot of people shifted down there, and he really loved it. He's like, we're on big studio sets, and it was like separated from the LA culture, so people there were like working. They're like, sounds great. They're just jumping from show to movie to show, and it was work. They loved it, but it was out of that atmosphere. Yeah. And so he was talking to me about that, but he was talking about just military members coming in because of that structure. He's like, he's like, hey, we just come in, give them a task, they do it, and they come back like, well, okay, what do we do now? And it's like, okay, cool. And they're just there to help. They don't want to, again, be the director. We're like, well, I want to try to, I'm the best, I'm plugging it in, but I want to talk to the director. It's like, no, their job is to plug it in and keep your mouth shut and move forward. So get your paycheck. And so he moved up pretty quick. He was Airforce as well. Yeah. And he moved up real quick. He's like, Joey
Vasca.
Vasca. I'm butchering it.
Sorry, Joey. I'm not trying to be disrespectful. I just want to make sure I have the right person.
Yeah, he's on actually on set right now in Thailand.
Oh, cool.
For their second film. And he's going to come back. I'm trying to get him on at the end of the month.
I got to get him on. I think we connected on Instagram. I got to get him on.
Yeah. He's great. And so, so they would do that, and he was talking about that, where it was just like, sometimes it's just the task and get the task done, and
but also, then you're around it.
And you're around it. Yeah, you're seeing the results. Another thing too, I tell people that especially when you're coming to smaller productions, it's long hours, and it gets physically taxing. There was times I remember being like, this sucks. I'm up till 1 a.m. because I'm the DP, I'm the director, I'm the DP. Well, the director's got his own small, in film school, but it's like, I got to lug all the Pelican cases with all these lights. I got to get these up on the 3rd floor. No one's helping me because it's film school, but I want this shot and I want the light to, and it did, it looked good. I mean, it wasn't great, but it looked good. And it's also the trigger time of it. But like, I remember just being physically exhausted. I mean, just carrying all the Pelicans, just getting all the cases just from film school into my truck was like 20 of them. Yeah. And that was just for me to dick around and have a good, learn the craft. But it's also, you get in, you get out what you put in. Yep. It really, and that sometimes it's physical. Sometimes it's just like, I'm going to go out and be uncomfortable. Yep. Like, it's going to be, especially like in Alaska, it was negative 30 degrees out. We slept. It was one of the worst nights of my life in that tent. And still got up the next morning, made sure I got a sunrise shot, made sure we got a shot with the drone, because you have to push through it. You don't get to just quit and be like, let's get it tomorrow. Yeah. Because when we're comfortable. So sometimes those hard moments, actually a lot of them hard moments in the military, get you prepared for films, because it's like you're gonna be in an uncomfortable spot and you get the fucking shot. They're paying you good money to get the shot.
Yeah. And like I always say, we're not getting shot at.
No, exactly.
Right? Which when we were in the military, we were getting shot at. We were doing our job under actual duress. Whereas here it's like, this might be difficult, uncomfortable. Little sleep. The elements are what they are. But we have a very strong foundation for that. I remember helping DPs lug gear around. I worked with NASCAR was a client for like 3.5 years. We followed that circus around the country, right? And just like I helped lug gear and watch those guys lug gear, and it's just like it's the life. It's the best. It's production, baby.
It's production. All right, so for vets getting into it, or just people in general getting into it, what's your recommendation? Like, we both talked both of our experiences. Yeah. If you want to get into this business, what do you think?
I mean, split the difference between the way that you and I did it, probably, right? Like, I'm in no position to give advice. I think one of the benefits of doing my podcast and having conversations like this, and then one of the benefits of being on this side of it, is understanding that everybody is living a story, right? Everybody is living their own journey. There's certainly things you should and shouldn't do, but there's also mistakes that you're going to make along the way, right? But you have to follow what it is that you want to do, but leave yourself open to the opportunities that unfold in front of you, right? Like I always say, do the work that's right in front of you and see what happens. And then that thing that happens will either keep you on that specific path, or it'll show you a branched opportunity within the industry. If I were to have been hyper focused on, I'm going to grind, I'm going to be an indie screenwriter and an indie director, I don't think that I would be doing that right now, 10 years later, right? Getting out of the military and getting out of film school. I took the opportunities that were in front of me, cobbled together the portfolio, and allowed myself to maneuver through the industry the way that I've been able to. And who knows, like maybe you and I will be like Ridley Scott, we'll live to our 90s and eventually get to do only the things that it is that we want to do. But at the moment, I got to do the things that are in front of me that give me then more opportunities. And owning my own production company now, co-owning my production company with my wife, it's like my goals immediately are twofold: revenue and opportunities. Yeah. So I want to generate revenue that will allow us to stay afloat, keep the business going, provide for our family, and then that will create more opportunities for us. Because the more opportunities you have and the more revenue you have, then the more choice that you have. When you get into something, get into the industry that you want to be in. In this case, it's filmmaking. Take the opportunities that are in front of you and work really hard at them and build relationships along the way. And understand that if you have aspirations to be a DP, but then you find yourself loving producing, well, then take the producer route, right? I think initially, education is important. I wouldn't discount it, but we're all really good at OJT, right? Yeah. Like on the job training is like what we're best at, right? Yeah. So go find opportunities to learn in the field, doing the things that other people have been doing longer than you. I think that's one of the things that happens as we get out and we're like, well, I have all these skills and I have all these experiences and I've gone to all these places and done all these things and I've done more than this person who's supposed to be teaching me. Well, while you were doing those other things, that person's been doing the thing that you want to do. Yep. So maybe pay attention to what they're saying. I'm not a big fan of like, shut up and do the job and don't say anything, but understand your place, ask the right questions and learn from the people around you, right? Like ask people like you do, like, how'd you get into this? What was your path? Like, what was your journey? And the more people you work with and the more people you talk to about that, the better understanding that you'll have of the options and opportunities that are in front of you. And when it comes to education,
oh, you're good.
When it comes to the education piece of it, I'm not going to advocate for Full Sail or for the community college that you went to or, USC Film School. I'm going to say, go do what's right for you because you need to go learn. You learned a lot from your professors. Yeah. I learned a lot from my professors because when academia is a weird place because a lot of times the people who are teaching in academia are not doing anymore. Film school is a little bit different. Yeah. It's usually people that are still doing, or people that have retired and did a lot and now just want to teach. Yeah. But our field and our craft is all about doing. Yeah. So go expose yourself to professors and mentors that can give you their perspective and don't, it's a range, right? It's a spectrum. Like, yeah, you need to go get on the job training, but you also need to study and learn and understand and keep your open mind. Don't just listen to what somebody says and do everything they say to a T because that's just their perspective. That's just their journey. That's just their approach and their opinion on how to do things. So get as many of those opinions as you possibly can from people that have been doing this. Unless it's you or me or Joey or Cameron or a couple of other people that are actually doing this in the industry, don't just surround yourself with a bunch of vets who want to do something. Yeah. Surround yourself with people that have been doing it. So don't lose your connection to the military community. Don't lose your connection to the veteran community, but don't overly identify with it and just get into a group of people who are like, oh man, I'm not getting what I need from the civilians. It's like, how much effort are you putting in to go learn from the civilians that are doing the thing that you want to do? And have done it for a long time that have something to teach you. So like let your experience inform you, but don't let your experience define you.
Awesome. Yeah. So where can people find you?
Instagram is the best place for me personally, veteranmade.ck. We're also at Veteran Made Productions for the production company. Veteranmadeproductions.com is the website. We've got a store up. We've got merch going, store.veteranmadeproductions.com. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn as well. So just my name, Carey Kight on LinkedIn. Shoot me a follow or a message or a connection and shoot me an email through the website. Happy to chat with anybody that wants to nerd out on film or advertising or production or whatever.
Hell yeah, man. Well, thanks for coming on.
Thanks, brother. Appreciate you.